Look like a Tully, but, deep down, she is a girl of the north. It's something she probably doesn't even recognize herself, but it is there nonetheless. However, as Margaery watched, the fight seemed to go out of Sansa. She lowered her eyes submissively. "But, I will do my duty," she whispered meekly. "These Starks will be the death of me." Robb was looking across the table at his sister. His face registered the awkwardness of the moment. He squirmed slightly in his seat. He can face down death without the slightest hesitation and kill men without blinking, but his little sister becoming emotional is enough to disconcert him. Truly, men are the most absurd of all the gods' creations. Catelyn glanced between her son and daughter, seemingly weighing up her own thoughts on the matter. She leaned over to touch Sansa's hand. By now the girl's shoulders were shaking with repressed emotion that was in danger of bubbling to the surface. "Be still, sweet girl," Catelyn said soothingly. "No one will make you do something you don't want to do. Would that my own family had been so understanding. Still, Lady Catelyn is unwise to make a promise she may not be able to keep." Sansa looked up tearfully. She gazed at her mother before looking over to her brother. "Really?" "Really," Robb said firmly, leaning back in his chair. "As I say, it was the Targaryens who suggested the match. It has not come from our side." His sister looked hopeful. "Please, Robb. Please. I do not want it." Catelyn was looking in slight surprise at her daughter. "Hardly surprising. She's often told me that Sansa was a big admirer of the old romantic stories where the gallant prince would slay evil beasts and foes before marrying the fair maiden. The Prince of Dragonflies and all that nonsense. The girl was apparently enamored by Joffrey Baratheon, believing him to be a fairy tale made real. In fact, Sansa was so convinced of her love for him she even accidentally betrayed her father to the Lannisters when faced with the prospect of being sent away from her intended. Now that she's faced with the prospect of marrying a Targaryen, the king himself, she balks. Is it any wonder that Sansa's mother is confused? "Relax, Sansa," Robb answered her. "It will not happen." His sister titled her head, wet tears glistening on her cheek. "It won't." "No, I mentioned two people whose opinion on this mattered. While yours is undoubtedly important, that of father will be just as important." Sansa looked quizzical. "Father? Do you forget?" Robb answered with a small smile. "Father remains the head of House Stark. You are still his daughter. You cannot marry without his permission." He looked to his mother, "And I think it very unlikely that he will approve any match with House Targaryen. Not after your experiences with Joffrey and my own interactions with Aegon." Catelyn nodded firmly. It was a small reaction to the rather angst-filled discussion that had preceded Sansa's arrival. "Robb has raged about the proposal of marriage. My sister is not a piece of meat to be bartered just because the Targaryens have got themselves into problems." "Robb, be realistic," Margaery replied. "Women are often traded for a family's gain. That is how alliances and wealth is made." She had glanced apologetically at Catelyn. "Your own mother was given in marriage to your father in order to secure the Riverlands' support in the war against the Mad King. Look at what a wonderful thing that became." "Sansa's last betrothal was to Joffrey," Robb said darkly. "I didn't like him at Winterfell, and I certainly didn't like the tyrant he became when his father died. But I was a dutiful son and said nothing when father made the match with King Robert. But I will not hold my silence this time. I tell you now that Aegon has it within him to be as cruel or as mad as Joffrey and Aerys ever were." "That being the case," Margaery said, "we should at least talk to Sansa before making a decision." Grudgingly, Robb had agreed. Now though it seemed that Robb's objections were quite minor compared to Sansa's own. She wants another man. That is not something that either Robb or his father will overlook. Back in the present, Sansa was looking more puzzled than before. "Why then did you ask what I thought, if you think that father will refuse the match?" "I asked," Robb explained, "simply to get your view. If you had felt differently to me, I would have written to father urging him to approve the marriage, despite my own misgivings. Politics aside, your happiness is extremely important to me. As you are empathically against it, I will do nothing save share your opinion with him. Your feelings will be all the reason father needs to reject the Targaryens' proposal. It won't cause problems, will it?" Sansa asked fearfully. Bless her, even now she is concerned with others more than herself. It seems she has grown as a person since she left Winterfell. "None at all," Robb assured his sister positively. the Targaryens will have to content themselves with the original treaty stipulations. They talked for some time until the evening drew in and food was brought by servants. Before they ate, Margaery sent Myra on an errand and, a short while later, the girl returned with Olenna Tyrell, who had decided to take up Margaery's offer and join them for dinner. As the old lady gently eased herself into a free seat, Grand Maester Stillowin arrived with more messages from across the realm. As Robb took a break from eating to read through the most important dispatches and converse with Maester Stillowin, he left the women to talk alone. "Quite right," Olenna snorted when Catelyn had finished filling her in on the Targaryen proposal. "Quite right indeed, my dear." She looked kindly at Sansa. "No need for marriage yet, you've still got time. Make the men wait. Even if one of the men in question is a king?" Catelyn asked good-naturedly. "Especially if it's a king." Margaery's grandmother cried gamely, "Does no harm to keep men humble, and no man could use a lesson like that more than a Targaryen." The old woman leaned forward onto her cane. "Let me tell you, young lady," she said conspiratorially to Sansa, "it was once intended that I should marry a Targaryen. It was all the rage back when I was a young maiden. But as soon as I saw the specimen they intended to palm me off with, I knew it wouldn't do. So I decided to marry Margaery's grandfather instead." "You decided?" Sansa breathed, incredulity overcoming her awe and fear of the old woman. "Indeed I did." The Queen of Thorns replied defiantly, "Women run the world, my dear, don't let the men tell you different. They do tend to be in charge a great deal of the time," Catelyn countered with a knowing smirk. Olenna cast a sly look around the table. "We let them think they are in charge, but we all know the truth. Very few men can resist a smile, some tears, or a come-hither look. Failing that, a nice pair of breasts and what lies beneath our skirts usually seals the deal." "Grandmother!" Margaery rebuked the older woman sternly, "Whatever will Lady Catelyn and Sansa think of us?" "Please?" Olenna snorted, "They are used to it. I've been to feasts with Northerners. They're more coarse and unrefined than almost anyone else in the Seven Kingdoms. Part wilderling from what I've heard. Whatever has got into her. Present company excluded, of course," Margaery added quickly. "I was getting to that," Olenna snapped irritably before turning to the other women. "The Starks are a breed apart, as are the Forresters, if young Myra is any indication. I admit to being quite mystified by their notions of honor and refinement. Their code may be blunt by Southern standards, but you can't deny the results. It makes their men follow them and their women love them." "Agreed," Catelyn concurred quietly. Olenna looked satisfied, but, before she could say more, Robb rejoined them at the table. At once Margaery could see that something was wrong. Her husband looked unhappy as he stretched across the table and took Lady Catelyn's hand. "Mother," Robb said quietly, his voice soft and sympathetic, "I wish there was an easy way to say this, but if there is it eludes me. Your nephew, Robin Arryn, has died." Silence gripped the table. Over her shoulder Margaery saw Myra usher out the rest of the handmaidens and Maester Stillowin take his place by the heavy canvas wall of the tent. "Gods be good," Catelyn whispered, looking down at the table. "How?" Robb looked sympathetically at his mother. "Lady Waynwood writes that he never woke from his shaking fit. They did all they could for him, but he just slipped away in his sleep. He was never a strong boy," Catelyn murmured, lost in her own thoughts. "The events in the Eyrie must have been too much for him." She abruptly looked at her son. "How is Lysa?" "She's not doing well." Robb looked pensive. "The news of her son's death has not yet reached her, but at some point she must be told." "Robin was her whole world," Catelyn said mournfully. "She so wanted to have a child." "The gods can be cruel indeed. Or just." Margaery almost said, "The woman murdered her own husband and connived with Petyr Baelish to start a war that has devastated the realm. In some small way you could see what has happened to her son as a sort of poetic justice. Lady Waynwood has asked whether you or Uncle Brynden wish to travel to Iron Oaks in order to be with her when she hears the news," Robb said. "Lady Anya is concerned that being told of her son's death may cause Aunt Lysa to lose what little health she still has left." Catelyn thought for a moment, staring off into the distance. Finally she returned her eyes to Robb. "I don't believe that either Uncle Brynden or I can be spared at present." Lady Catelyn shot a glance at Margaery. "Your baby is almost due. My place is here. And, while that remains the case, Uncle Brynden is needed at Riverrun. You can ask him, but I believe he'll feel the same." Margaery nodded to herself. Hard as it is, our focus must remain on the Targaryens in the south. On concluding the peace treaty. What is one distraught woman who brought her condition on herself compared to that? If Lysa Arryn had had her way, she would have taken Robin with her to his death on the rocky ground of the Eyrie. At least the boy died peacefully in his bed. Robb looked for a moment at his mother and then patted her hand. As you wish. The task will go to Lady Waynwood. There was a quiet lull for a moment before Olenna broke the silence with her raspy voice. Without meaning to sound callous, I was just wondering who inherits the lordship of the Vale of Arryn. It was a legitimate question, especially given that the Knights of the Vale were an essential part of the Stark army, but Margaery feared that Catelyn would take offense to the question. To her relief, Robb's mother's expression was one more of uncertainty than anger. I don't know, she answered slowly. It is Sir Harold Hardang, my Lady Grand Maester reminded her, coming to the rescue. He is the grandson of Lord Jon Arryn's sister. Harry the heir, Sansa whispered wonderingly. Margaery eyed her. Sansa's face had adopted a dreamy expression. The conclusion was obvious. So the daughter of Winterfell has feelings for the young falcon of the Vale. How romantic. Harold is currently fighting in the north as part of Father's army, Robb noted. A raven has been sent to Winterfell relaying the news. Lady Waynwood, Lord Hunter and Lord Belmore have, in their capacity as the ruling body of the Vale, decided that Harold should inherit the high seat of the Arryns. It is not expected to be opposed by any of the other Vale lords. Once he has accepted the title, it will be up to Harold what he wants to do as the Vale's new liege lord. He could return south or decide to conclude the campaign with Father. Sir Harold has already sworn a oath of loyalty to King Robb, Lewyn said. He has pledged his support to our cause. If Harold feels the same about Sansa as she plainly does for him, then that loyalty is unlikely to change. That's all to the good. Another young warrior who is loyal to Robb and his aims. Robb nodded absently as he continued to pay attention to his mother. His concern for her overriding his feelings regarding politics. Margaery resisted the impulse to shake her head. Absolutely useless politically, but a great man nonetheless. You should announce the betrothal of Sansa Stark to Harold Hardang as soon as possible. The Queen chuckled as she walked arm in arm with her grandmother on their way back to the others' tent. Behind them, 2 members of the Wolf Guard escorted them in silence, keeping a respectful distance back so they could walk in private. It's not a hard task. Between grandmother's old legs and the extra weight I'm carrying, we can't get too far ahead. I shouldn't be surprised that you picked up on that. Olenna Tyrell harumphed. A blind man could see the look on that girl's face. She's besotted with the boy. Still, my point stands. If a betrothal is quickly announced, then it gives your husband the chance to refuse the request from the Targaryens without causing offense. Robb would never do that, Margaery said firmly. He won't rush his sister into a marriage. Of course he won't, Olenna sighed despairingly. That damned northern honor. Still, maybe a case could be made that if it's going to happen anyway, then why not use it to its best advantage? We're just talking betrothal rather than marriage itself. I will discuss it with him, the Queen offered. She smiled sweetly. Who knows, if the right arguments are made, he may be amenable. Her grandmother chuckled. I dare say. Abruptly the laughter died and she sighed mournfully. I had hoped that a match could be made between the Sansa girl and Willers, Olenna said as they slowly followed the track that led to the Queen of Thorns' tent. It's high time that boy was wed, though the old woman let forth another sigh. I suppose he'll be too busy now to think of starting a family. Too busy? Margaery asked, confused. Ah, I see that you young people don't tell each other everything. Olenna smirked. Haven't you heard? Your husband has extended an offer to Willers, asking him to become the new Master of Coin. He also officially confirmed Willers as Warden of the Reach. He needn't have bothered, but, with your father's disappearance, it removes any doubt of who's in charge. Margaery stopped in her tracks. In the light of the various torches and campfires there was sadness but also a sparkle in her grandmother's eyes. Robb and I spoke about this, but he didn't tell me that he had made a decision, Margaery said wonderingly. Even now, her husband found ways to surprise her. I understand that is the first of many offers. Lord Redwyne has been offered Master of Ships and there is even talk of a new Master of War being appointed. Apparently there are 3 candidates for the position, Lord Tarly, Lord Royce and Sir Brynden Tully. I was surprised that Lord Eddard isn't being considered, but apparently he is not. The old woman gave her a small grin, or at least that's what the king told me when we spoke last night. You spoke to Robb last night? Margaery asked accusingly. The Queen had retired to her bed straight after dinner and had left her husband talking to Maester Luwin and his mother. He visited me, Olenna reported, a young handsome man in my tent, was quite a thrill, let me tell you. If I was but a decade younger. Grandmother! Margaery exclaimed, laughing cheerfully, though her mind raced. She had had many conversations with Robb recently about the formation of a new small council, but she had no idea that Robb had decided to act on the substance of their discussions. Not to worry, my dear, nothing untoward occurred. Your husband is as true as ever. Olenna resumed their walk. He wanted my advice on the new Master of War. She paused. It was all a test, of course. There is a danger of too many lords from the Reach being put into position in the makeup of any new council. Your husband wanted to make sure that I wasn't trying to stack the deck in the Reach's favor. And what did you tell him? Oh, naturally I said they were all worthy candidates and that I would applaud whatever choice the king made. The Queen's grandmother replied confidently. It happens to be the truth. All three are capable commanders. But Lord Redwyne and Willers only make two. Margaery mused. Lord Tarly would make three. How delightful that the Maester's lessons on mathematics were not lost on you, Olenna said wryly. However, should Lord Randall be added as Master of War, there will be 5 highborn from the Reach on the council. 5. Olenna straightened, using her cane to allow her to come out of her perpetual stoop. The king has appointed me to the council as Master, or should that be Mistress, of Whisperers. Margaery was dumbstruck. There has never been a woman on the small council. Now there shall be 3, Olenna declared. Your husband is apparently disinterested in what is traditionally done. He tells me that if a woman is good enough to be the commander of the Wolfguard, then why not have a woman as a counselor? The Queen's head felt like it was spinning. She knew her husband was more progressive than most other lords and kings, but never had she suspected this. Who are the other 2? Was all she could think of to say as she wrapped her head round what she had just been told. Lady Waynwood has been appointed to oversee the making of laws and justice throughout the realm. The king aims to have her leave the Vale as soon as possible and join us here. A proposition that will come sooner rather than later now that Robin Arryn has died. And the other? Margaery inquired, irked that she had to find out things from others that she should have, by rights, known herself. He means to appoint his mother, I assume. Wrong. The old woman crowed with pleasure. He means to appoint you to the small council, my dear. And a very good decision to make if I do say so myself. Me. Come now, Margaery, Olenna sniffed impatiently, you can't be surprised. Boy tells me that he wouldn't or couldn't rule without you. As such, he means to put you in charge of the council as de facto hand with all the power that position implies. Margaery stared in shock. She knew that it was likely that Robb would have found her a place in whatever government he created. Indeed, she would insist upon it, but it had never occurred to her that Robb would appoint her to such a central role. Give his queen power, real power, that she could wield officially. Not only did he make the unexpected offer to me, Olenna continued, but he also informed me of his other more broad intentions, including creating more wardens for the various regions, including new wardens for the Riverlands, Westerlands and Iron Islands. It makes sense, Margaery said slowly. The regions are already run by liege lords who are often the wardens anyway. This just formalizes the process and will hopefully make for better government, catering for regional needs while still taking orders from the king. Indeed, Olenna remarked, it is a good idea, along with having each warden have its own version of the small council to better regulate justice and taxation. She smiled. I saw your hand behind the idea at once, of course. I'm glad you approve, the Queen said, though the plans are in their infancy. We still have much of the detail to work out. Well, yes, the matriarch of House Tyrell replied, as is this notion of building a new capital. Margaery's mouth fell open. I can't believe he told you that. It was just an idea that Robb and I had in the late hours when I couldn't sleep. Well, it may have come from a place born of sleep deprivation, but the King's has already asked Grand Maester Luwin to study how it might be done. The old woman looked at Margaery. I have to say, my dear, a new capital. Wherever did you come up with the idea? It wouldn't be a new capital, the young woman replied defensively. As you know, we thought to take King's Landing and make that our new seat. Well, that was my plan at any rate. The Targaryen arrival has thrown that scheme into disarray. We needs must have a new capital to serve our own requirements. The Queen looked around. We cannot live in tents, nor run a realm, just sitting here a league or so from King's Landing. Go on. Olenna urged slyly. We need a fortress that can be made defensible, is large enough to hold our court and is in a central location. The logical solution, it seemed to me, would be to rebuild Harrenhal. That awful place. Olenna sniffed, it is thought to be cursed. While I don't hold with superstitious nonsense, such things matter to the small folk. Harrenhal is cursed, Margaery replied. We intend to rename our new city as it is being built, to wipe away the spirits of the past. She paused for dramatic effect. We were thinking of calling it Highfell. A curious novelty, her grandmother noted, still the cost of such an endeavor will be horrendous. No doubt the Queen conceded, which is why it will be done in stages. The place will be planned out in advance and then grown slowly over time. King's Landing did not exactly spring up overnight. True, the other woman rasped, but then King's Landing was also a central port. A focal point of trade up and down the eastern coast, as well as a logical lure for trade ships from Essos. Margaery was ready for this, agreed, but we shall build up the ports at Gulltown and White Harbour, and the new capital will still sit on the principal roads that intersect the realm. I even mean to build a new road to the west of the God's Eye that will travel through the Stony September and on to Bitterbridge, completely ignoring King's Landing and the Targaryens. A clever notion, Olenna allowed, but first you will have to work to clear out the rabble of sellswords and cutthroats that infect the Riverlands. Sir Brynden is already hard at work doing just that. Margaery informed her grandmother. Hopefully, given time, even the Brotherhood without banners will be brought into the fold. Good, good. Olenna muttered, her mind already seemingly going on to other things. But the cost will be borne, the Queen said firmly. We'll find the money somewhere. The rebuilding project will be vital to reinvigorate the Riverlands. Robb and his men were careful not to destroy the infrastructure of the Westerlands on their campaign. Sadly, the Lannisters showed no such consideration when they ravaged the Tully lands. We must help them rebuild. A task made infinitely more difficult if we are saddled with the Iron Throne's debts. Olenna retorted, a hint of anger in her tone. Ah, so that is what's on her mind. The last part of our conversation at dinner. That of the Targaryen request for assistance in paying off the Iron Bank and the Faith. Robb is still undecided on the issue of the Crown's debts, Margaery noted. He feels a sense of responsibility. After all, he has a large portion of the realm at his command. It doesn't sit well with him that the southern lands should suffer because of their rulers, which they inevitably will when taxes need to be increased to make repayments. It's not his problem, the Queen's grandmother insisted. The debt belongs to the Iron Throne. Robb Stark does not sit the Iron Throne, ergo it is not his debt. My husband sees things a bit differently, Margaery commented, though only on the issue of paying the Iron Bank. As far as the Faith goes, Robb is adamant that they will receive not a penny from us. Why is the boy so vehement? Olenna inquired. He was not at all impressed with the Faith's offer to stir up trouble for the Targaryens and their invitation to acknowledge that Robb as king, in exchange for agreeing to stamp out other religious. Robb is absolutely set on denying the Faith. He was most riled by their presumption and threats. Because they made them through you. Olenna said knowingly, because they appeared to threaten his wife. Well, yes, Margaery said smilingly, he is very angry that the High Septon tried to threaten me. Especially when he heard from Brian that the man brought lackeys into the gardens in a misguided attempt to intimidate us. Which must be why he denied the High Septon's request that you attend him at the Great September. What? Why didn't he tell me this? Margaery suddenly glowering, in fact, why am I finding out about any of this now? I suspect that your husband is more capable than we ever thought a Northerner could be. He is clearly listening and acting on your advice. You've done extremely well with him. Olenna seemed uncomfortable. It would appear we are guilty of Southern prejudice, my dear. The Starks are proving far more adept than we thought. Even so. Olenna snapped, you can't enjoy his protection on the one hand and yet protest that he is overprotective on the other. With gratitude and wisdom like that, it's no wonder that women haven't been appointed to the small council before. Her grandmother tutted with impatience as she, yet again, resumed her walk, leaving Margaery to follow after her, lost in her thoughts. Later that evening the king entered their private section of the tent. He stripped to his undergarments before laying down beside his queen. That conversation with Sansa earlier was extremely difficult. Margaery almost laughed, her earlier anger at her husband's independence forgotten. When all is said and done, he has done nothing I do not approve of. You've led men into battle where death could happen at any instant, but you describe talking to your own sister as difficult. Her husband gave a wry smile as he rose from the bed. He made her way to a stand where a pitcher of wine had been placed. He poured a goblet and offered it her way, but she shook her head adamantly. Shrugging, Rob picked up the goblet and returned to the bed where he sat, nursing his drink. The talking part is easy. Not so the notion of hearing that your sister has desires for a man. Margaery did laugh then. She couldn't help it. Reaching across the distance between them and touched his arm affectionately. What did you expect? She is still young, Rob said defensively. An edge of protectiveness creeping into his tone. Not much younger than we were when we first met, Margaery reminded him, and old enough to be betrothed to Joffrey. That was a mistake, Rob said quickly, and not one that we will repeat. Agreed, Margaery replied. Idly she let her finger follow a scar that ran from the back of Rob's shoulder blade up to his neck. She took in his almost naked form. You're very handsome, you know. He looked down on her, smiling, the expression reaching his eyes and making them shine. And you are very beautiful. She regarded herself. What I am, is a monstrous lump. I'm heavy and disgusting. Not so, Rob promised, kissing her lightly. You're still beautiful to me. His tongue slipped into her mouth, letting her taste the wine he had just been drinking. Sighing contentedly, she looped her hands around his neck, her fingers interweaving themselves through his hair. She struggled to rise to face him. Try as she might, she could simply not get the purchase needed to lever herself up. Groaning in frustration, she pulled her husband down on top of her. Rob's hands suddenly sprung out to stop his weight from falling. We can't. Denied a pleasure she had had but once, the queen pouted. We could be careful. Rob gave her a wry look. You know full well that, when I'm with you, being careful is the last thing on my mind. He disentangled her arms and kissed her hands. You shouldn't tempt me further. It was a rejection, but it was one that was bearable and, she understood, only done out of necessity. At her smile of acceptance at his words, Rob pulled himself onto the bed and wrapped her in his strong arms. Margaery nestled into his chest with a sigh of contentment, thought with a bit of frustration. Your grandmother told you my plans? He said with the top of her head pressed into his cheek. Her eyes snapped open, alert. How could you know that? I knew the instant you returned to the tent. You smiled at me with a brilliance that smacked of a Tyrell being given more power. Outrageous. Margaery sunk her nails into the muscles of the king's chest until he grunted in discomfort. I take it back, Rob yielded gracefully. I should think so, the queen exclaimed before allowing her tone to soften. It means a lot to me that you would grant me such a position. It's one thing to be made regent to our child, but quite another to be given power all of its own. Tears came unbidden to her eyes. It shows a great level of trust and respect. Rob adjusted his embrace so that he could kiss her forehead. It merely acknowledges your place in my rule. Nothing more. His voice was hard but suffused with affection. You are my queen. I want you by my side, in all things. There's no other place I would rather be. Margaery responded quietly. Good, Rob said, stroking her back. She felt a fleeting spark of arousal. I can't wait to give birth so I can act on these urges. Being with child is just so undignified. It's awful. I'm not surprised you'd feel that way. Margaery angled to look at him. Oh. Why is that? Her husband looked at her in wide-eyed innocence. Why, everyone knows that the girls of the Reach are nothing but tender-hearted maidens who wilt at the feeling of a stiff breeze. It's not surprising you can't handle the trials of being pregnant. Oh. The queen snatched a small pillow from the royal bed and got to her knees to batter Rob about the face. I'll show you who's a tender-hearted maiden. Her husband was laughing as he raised his hands in a mock defense. Abruptly he reached over and embraced in a firm yet tender hug. I yield, my lady, I yield. His lips sought hers hungrily. As they settled down, Rob spoke once more. You'll let me know if having me by your side during the night becomes uncomfortable. He says the same thing every night. It was unnecessary, but she loved him all the more for the offer. Just out of curiosity, what would you do if I told you it was making me uncomfortable? I'd sleep elsewhere. You'd leave your wife and mother of your unborn child alone in the night. Her voice was all mock outrage. What if I needed you? I'd still be here, Rob assured her easily. I'd sleep on the floor at the foot of the bed. You'd be hard-pressed for space, Margaery noted. She jutted her chin towards the end of the bed. You have a rival. They both looked down and saw the large figure of Grey Wind. The direwolf was curled up on the floor at the end of the bed. Though the bed was quite high, the wolf was so large that they could see its ears rising and falling in time with the animal's steady breathing over the wooden frame of the bed. Margaery found it incredible that she had ever been scared of Grey Wind. The wolf was no longer fearsome to her, but a friend she could never imagine being without. On more than one occasion, when she had slept in or retired early, the wolf had joined her on the bed, sliding in close so that she could share its warmth and comfort. Well, Rob commented dryly, as fearsome a beast as he is, I'm sure I would prevail in a contest. You'd fight him for me? Margaery's eyes went wide in mock admiration. A fair wide-eyed maiden, duel a fearsome direwolf for the right to sleep on my floor. Rob adopted a look of gallant certitude, but of course. It's the least I can do for my queen. My hero. Her husband gathered her in close. As they drifted off to sleep, she heard him mumble, I would take on the world for you. And there, in the dark confines of the tent, but safe within the warmth of his arms, she knew that he meant it. Notes. It appears that some avid readers have already been preempting various plot points, as you could see above. Sadly, some of the ideas have already been put about in the comments. Curses. D. Chapter 66, Eddard 6. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. His surroundings were white and sparkling. Snow fell lightly onto him as he rode, the flakes penetrating the branches of the tall trees to sprinkle across his path. At the moment his body heat was enough to melt the snow as it came to rest, but he knew it would not be that way for long. Winter is coming. The thought spurred him on as he rode a little faster through the dense foliage, following the narrow path of the wood as they carried on their journey. He glanced behind him to see his son swaying lightly in the saddle of his grey mare. Rickon, wrapped tightly in thick furs, his breath steaming in the air as it escaped from under his hood, kept control of his horse as they pushed their mounts on. Ned wanted to ride back and help his son, but knew the boy would resist any assistance. Better to let him struggle through in his own way. They had nearly arrived at their destination. The thought did not salve his heavy conscience. I barely know my own son. He was little more than a toddler when I left. All he has known the last few years is abandonment and fear. One by one his family left until he was left all alone with only a servant for protection. A lone woman who died a horrendous death in a futile attempt to let him escape the clutches of our enemies. When Howland Reed had arrived back at Winterfell the evening of their victory against the Boltons with Rickon in tow, father and son had struggled to recognize one another. Ned had embraced the boy and whispered that things were all right now, but the boy had refused to answer. Indeed, Rickon had refused to speak for many days, so traumatized was he by the events that had played out in his short life. However, after gentle coaxing he had started to talk, to explain what had happened to him. The story his son told had left Ned angry and guilt-ridden. I should have been there for him. I should never had left him alone. It had seemed like wisdom at the time. Ned had left Catelyn, Robb and even Bran at Winterfell. Sadly though, they had all parted ways with Rickon, leaving him alone and unprotected in a dangerous world. Maybe, in time, he'll forgive me. It was to try and build bridges between Ned and his son that had resulted in him deciding that they would make this journey together. It was intended to be a short trip. Indeed, Ned hoped to have returned to Winterfell in a matter of days, but one that was important and would hopefully afford the Starks the opportunity to reconnect with one another. Sadly, I cannot say the same for Arya. No, she will remain under guard in Winterfell. As always, thoughts of his errant daughter caused anger to flare within him. He fought to maintain his temper, and it was only with extreme self-control that he managed to curtail the rage within him. A week ago he had been beside himself with fear and worry. He had finished his war council and set out how the plan for battle, only to discover that Gendry and Arya were nowhere to be found. A quick search had revealed that their armor and weapons were missing, and logic told him that they must have slipped out of the camp in the turmoil of preparing for battle. Logic also said that there was only one place they would have gone. Rickon. Arya is going to try and rescue her brother. So it was that Ned had called on Howland Reed. The Lord has already been tasked with setting off to find wherever Roose Bolton had stashed Ned's son and to effect a rescue with a party made up of Crannog men. Ned caught them just as they were about to head out of the camp, bound north to skirt around the enemy lines. Howland had listened to him carefully, finally asking, "You want me to change direction and hunt them down now?" Ned had been torn. "Is it likely that you'll bring them back before the battle?" "No," Howland had said plainly, giving Ned the honest truth. "Most like they slipped out hours ago. Given time I can track them down. Neither your squire nor the girl are experienced woodsmen, but to do so will take time. Time we don't have. Not if my men and I are to be across the river in the next few hours." "You think that's where Roose will have Rookon?" The Crannog men sniffed. "It's the best place to have him. Roose is a clever bastard. He'll want your boy close but not so close that he might be harmed in a fight." Ned nodded. He looked out across the frost-covered lands around Winterfell. He knew that Howland was standing silently, waiting for Ned to make a decision, but also aware of the horrible consequences that decision might take. Abruptly Ned turned. "As far as we know, Gendry and Arya are still free. If I send scouts to bring them back, I would betray our plans, run the chance that the Umber trap may be uncovered. I'd risk endangering the entire force, hundreds of men, for the lives of two youths who should have known better. Arya and Gendry mean a great deal to me, but they opted to do this." He bowed his head in frustration. "Damn them." Howland placed a hand on Ned's shoulder. The man was nodding in understanding. "I'll carry on with the original task. I promise you, Ned, I will find Rookon and free him. After that, we'll see to young Gendry and that stubborn daughter of yours." The Lord of Greywater had been good to his word. He and his men had found Rookon and extracted him from the guards put in place by Roose Bolton. Howland had instructed his men to get back across the river with the young Stark while he waited in the woods for Roose to arrive to retrieve the boy. "I thought that I'd get him with one of my arrows," Howland said later. "Didn't expect Bolton to blunder back in with Arya and Gendry with him." But blunder the Lord of the Dreadfort had. The mistake had cost Roose his life and that of his son. Howland had arrived back at Winterfell an hour after his team, Arya and Gendry going in behind them, red-faced and ashamed. "I found something you lost," he had jested to Ned in his usual dull tone. The joke did nothing to cover the pain and worry that Ned had been feeling throughout the battle. Ned's feelings had warped between reliefs that his daughter was safe to abject rage that she had left the safety of the camp and gone on her own ridiculous mission to rescue her brother. It was stupid, foolish, and had almost got the two youngsters killed, all for no possible gain. It was my own fault. I indulged Arya her wildness and never reined her in when I should have done. I encouraged her, fought her side when Catelyn despaired about her being a lady. I even let her be trained in art of swordplay by Ciri O'Florel. She has always been willful. From the moment we left the Riverlands she has been insisting that I give her a role in combat. My refusal to indulge her now could only lead to one thing, rebellion. And such rebellion, Ned knew, could only be answered one way. As soon as he had hugged Arya and given Gendry a pat on the shoulder, he had had them both confined to their tents and placed under guard to ensure their compliance. I shall have to deal with them both properly when I return to Winterfell. Others take me, I'm not looking forward to it. He had thanked Howland profusely for returning his children. True to his nature, the Cranogman had merely nodded his head. I'm not surprised he did the same thing when he saved me from Arthur Dayne. The Lord of Greywater Watch looked unperturbed by it, although Ned knew better. The recent action had not negated Howland's own feelings over the disappearance of his two children who had not been seen in some time. "Once the North is ours again, we will find them. We will find them all." With a heavy heart Ned pushed his horse forward, his mount responding eagerly. For another hour they rode in silence when suddenly a guard captain rode towards him. Ned raised a mailed fist and the column halted. "Northern host, my lord, several hundred of them, approaching from the west." Ned nodded. "Deploy our outriders in that direction and be on your guard. But don't be too concerned. If I'm right, that will be Lord Forrester fresh from liberating Deepwood Motte." The captain smiled. "Aye, my lord. As you command." The man whirled his horse and rode off. The Warden of the North sat easily in the saddle as his men fanned out and formed lines around him. He had brought only a few hundred as an escort. This land was safe and relatively free of rebels. He had nothing to fear as he sat quietly exchanging a small smile with Rickon. A few minutes more and a scout from the other army was led up to him. The man was dirty, his clothes well worn, but his eyes were alert. "Lord Stark. Lord Forrester sends his regards and, the man paused awkwardly. Ned looked the man up and down. "Go on." The man seemed to be reddening behind his thick black beard. "And, he asks if you would be so kind as not to engage his host, as you are both friendly forces." He repressed a chuckle. "My compliments to your lord, advise him that we will not engage." "Is he near our destination?" "Half a league away, my lord," the scout reported dutifully. "There was one other thing I was instructed to say." "Which is?" The messenger allowed himself a brief smile. "Welcome to Ironroth." Ned has always been slightly envious of the seat of House Forrester. The imposing castle stronghold had been built along the northern border of the Wolfswood, where the wood met the cliffs which were home to the mountain clans. Surrounded by tall ironwood trees, it was a striking castle that inspired awe and respect. "It's a remarkable place, though my heart will always belong to Winterfell." They arrived at more or less the same time as Lord Forrester, who led his column through the woods to the west. The Forrester host marched in quiet formation. There was an odd air of failure surrounding the group. Concerned Ned trotted his horse forward so that it was way ahead of the two hosts. A moment later his movements were matched by Lord Gregor, who rode ahead of his men and presented himself before his liege lord. "Lord Stark," Gregor said formally, bowing his head. "Lord Forrester," Ned answered, taking in the man before him. He was surprised. He had expected the man to be triumphant. He had successfully campaigned across almost the entire western side of the north, being victorious against several enemy forces and now liberating Deepwood Motte, the home of House Glover, overlords of House Forrester. Why then is he so downhearted? "Is there something wrong, my lord?" Ned asked, indicating that they should ride together towards the gates of Ironroth. "My lord," Gregor said as he urged his horse alongside Ned's own. He sighed deeply, his eyes part closed in pain. "I regret to inform you that, while we successfully drove the Ironborn out of Deepwood Motte, a fire broke out during the fight. The castle is gutted." "Were many hurt?" Ned asked, concerned. "Castles can be rebuilt." Gregor Forrester sighed again. He seemed to struggle with his words. "My lord, Robert Glover's wife, the Lady Sybil, perished in the flames, as did Leyland Snow, the bastard son of Lord Hornwood." Ned stopped his horse. He looked urgently at Lord Forrester. "What of Galbart Glover's niece and nephew?" "Robert Glover's children." "My lord," Gregor said, his voice ragged, "they are dead as well. They drowned at sea when the ship carrying them back from the Iron Islands rounded Sea Dragon Point and got caught in a storm. Their bodies washed ashore on Bear Island." He stared in horror at the Lord of Ironroth. "Do you mean to tell me that House Glover has been rendered extinct?" Gregor bowed his head. There were tears streaming down his face, but he paid them no mind. He did not instantly reply, as if afraid that speaking the words would make the terrible truth seem more real. "Then, yes, my lord. Lord Galbart died in the Westerlands. His brother was murdered at the Twins. With the deaths of Goran, Irina and now Sybil, House Glover is now extinguished. Others take me. A northern house that has stood as loyal vassals to Winterfell for centuries undone is less than a year." Ned was silent. He could not get his head around it. Fate was cruel to allow such a thing. At least Galbart died quickly with a sword in his hand, acting with honor, but Robert was cut down by the betrayal of the Boltons and the Freys while he was supposedly surrounded by friends. Now his wife and children were gone. It was heartbreaking. Even as Ned thought it, he felt coldness creep into his own heart. With an act of will he pushed aside the pain he felt. "What about the castle's other inhabitants?" Gregor seemed to feed on his liege lord's composure. "We got a great many of them out. We marched the group here so that we could grant them shelter while Deepwood is rebuilt." Forrester paused, gathering himself. "Initially we thought that the Ironborn had set the fire as an act of defiance, but so many of their own number perished in the flame it could only have been an accident." "You captured some?" Ned asked quickly. "Yes," Gregor said, motioning behind him. "We've marched them here along with Deepwood's small folk. We have about 200 as captives along with their leader, Yara Greyjoy, Balon's only daughter." "A Greyjoy," Ned muttered, his voice so low he might have been talking to himself. "Captured alive. That's an impressive feat." The Lord of Ironroth waved away the compliment. With Roderick's and Lord Malister's force added to my own, we vastly outnumbered the invaders. We came in the night, Gregor cursed suddenly. Must have been why the fuckers were trying to light more torches and had the accident that started the flames. When that started, it was every man for himself. Bastards fled in all directions, leaving me and my men to try and douse the flames and help survivors. Next morning I sent riders to hunt the curs. There may be few still out there, but not many. Ned nodded silently. I must remember to speak to this Greyjoy woman. He became acutely aware that a lot of people were watching them. Soldiers from both hosts were watching over their shields, wondering when their commanders would give the order for them to approach their destination and allow them to rest for the night. Not only that, but some of the inhabitants of Ironroth had started to filter out of the castle and watch the approaching force with curiosity. Summoning a resolve from deep within him, Ned reached up and laid a hand on Lord Forrester. What happened was not your fault, Gregor. I know you loved the Glovers deeply, but there was nothing you could do. You have always acted with honor and dignity, worthy of your name and title. What has happened to House Glover is no blame of yours. Gregor Forrester clearly did not believe a word of it, but he nodded his thanks just the same. That will have to do for the time being. Then come, Ned said, letting his voice harden so that the Northman took it as an order. Your family is waiting for you, and it does them no good to see you like this. They have waited a long time for their lord to return, and you have, in victory. It doesn't feel like victory, Gregor observed bitterly. No, I suppose it wouldn't. Perhaps you're right, Ned persisted, but you have a family and people to care for. You have a duty. I know you will not fail them. As expected, his words galvanized Gregor Forrester, who straightened in his saddle and set his shoulders. With a brief nod of agreement, the Northerner indicated that Ned should carry on his progress towards the castle. No, my lord. Ned said firmly, you go first. But, my lord. That is not. I insist, the Lord of Winterfell declared. You may not feel like a victor, but I say different. A sentiment no doubt echoed by your people and family. He indicated the group milling around the castle gates. They are waiting for you now. Ride up and join them. Without looking, Gregor nodded in thanks and spurred his horse up the small rise towards the castle. Ned twisted to his small group of hornblowers that were trailing behind him. The Lord of Ironroth returning. A cacophony of sound went up from the horns held by the half-dozen men. In an instant the horns were joined by their counterparts within the castle walls, as well as by the shouts and cheers of the small folk along with the army still approaching from the woods. With a thin smile, Ned gripped his reins and followed Gregor Forrester as he arrived home. They passed the heavily guarded archway and entered a stretched courtyard that was flanked by shops and traders. There were groups of small folk on either side of the small street screaming in joy and happiness as their lord returned. Ned kept the smile on his face, but a dark thought occurred to him. How many men left this place never to return? How many families will be torn apart by grief and loss? He rode behind Gregor as he worked his way through the group on his way to the steep steps that led the way up to the Great Hall of Ironroth. Even now Ned could see a group of highborn gathered at the top of the steps near the massive doors that marked the entrance to the Forrester Long Hall. The Lord of Ironroth was waving left and right as he moved forward. However, as soon as he saw the group at the top of the steps, his eyes locked onto them and did not deviate. Smiling broadly, he rode up to the steps and dismounted from his horse. Ned arrived at the steps a moment or two after Gregor, staying on his horse as he watched Lord Forrester ascend the steps towards his family and household. He glanced behind him to give an encouraging smile to Rookon before indicating to a captain that he should stand the men down and begin to set up camp outside of Ironroth's walls. It will not be an easy task. The Wolfswood will be an obstacle to creating an orderly camp for the hundreds of men we have with us. Leaving it to the others, Ned got down from his horse. He beckoned Rookon to join him and, together the two went up the steps the same way as Lord Gregor, cheers accompanying him as he waved to the crowd that hollered in recognition of the Warden of the North. The two stopped a few stairs short of the summit where the Lord of Ironroth had gathered 3 youngsters to him. 2 boys and a girl were hugging Gregor fiercely, tears of joy on their faces. Ned was moved at the sight of a family being reunited. Well, partially at least. Myra remains with her mistress in the south, though Roderick should be around here somewhere. Gregor had straightened and was holding his children's hands as he took in the sight of his wife. Lady Elissa Forrester was standing watching her husband's arrival serenely. She wore a blue and ivory gown, her long hair freely flowing down her back. The Lady of Ironroth eyed Lord Gregor imperiously. "Welcome home, my lord," the lady's soft voice rang out clearly. "My lady," Gregor said, bowing his head in acknowledgement. The crowd cheering increased in volume. A smile briefly flit across Lady Elisa's face before she looked over her husband's shoulder. "Lord Eddard, forgive us," she said, curtsying before him. "We had not expected the Warden of the North to visit us here. We have had nothing prepared by way of welcome." Ned inclined his head in greeting. "There is no need on my account, my lady. All I ask is that some barrels of ale are made available for your husband's return." The lady came of her curtsy with a slight smile. "That is something we can certainly provide." "Then you have my thanks, my lady," Ned replied. Elisa looked back at her husband, surveying him quickly. "There is yet more grey in your hair," she noted dryly, "and you have gotten fat whilst you've been away." This was a nonsense, of course. If anything, Lord Forrester was leaner than when Ned had first reacquainted himself with the northerner at Harrenhal. Ned started as he looked at Gregor for his reaction. The man stood rigidly in place. Ironroth's master slowly allowed his head to drop slightly. "My deterioration has proceeded apace." His wife was not swayed by the admission. "I thought by now you would be dead and rotting under one of your many battlefields." Gregor Forrester seemed rooted to the spot, as still as though he was on the parade ground. "I shall endeavor to die, this year if possible, my lady." Elisa gave him a knowing glance as she stepped down the steps towards the men. Her eyes lingered on her husband for a moment and then she was gone, evidently distracted by a group of men that had neared the steps on their horses. Suddenly, the Forrester children laughed and ran after her. Roderick Forrester had ridden up to the foot of the stairs. He swiftly dismounted and brought his mother into a tender hug. A moment later his siblings joined him. Ned stood awkwardly, drawing Rookon to stand in front of him, sure to keep both hands on the boy's shoulders. He stood rigidly, unsure as to whether he should say something about Lady Forrester's harsh words to her husband. Abruptly the Lord of Ironroth barked a laugh. "Isn't she glorious?" With a shake of his head he followed his wife so that he could join the family reunion. "Was the lady mean to him, Papa?" Rookon asked quietly. Ned knelt to look at his son. The boy seemed withdrawn and somber. "Is it any wonder given what he has been through these last few months?" "No, my son. Lady Elisa and Lord Forrester were just playing a little game. She is very relieved to see him home and to see that he is all right after the fighting." Rookon nodded thoughtfully. Suddenly he looked shy. "Is Mama all right? And Rob and Sansa and Arya?" He made sure to look at his son squarely in the eyes. "They are well. You saw Arya at Winterfell a few days ago. Remember?" The boy looked doubtful. "I didn't see her for long." "You were angry, very angry." "Others take me, I was." He allowed, his face full of regret. "Arya did something she shouldn't have done. She put herself and others in danger. That was why I was angry." "Can I see her?" Ned's heart felt heavy. "Of course. As soon as we get back to Winterfell you can spend time with her. She would like that." Another nod. "What about Mama?" He steeled himself. "Mama is in the south with Rob. As soon as we sort things in the north they'll come to see us. I promise." His son looked doubtful. "Osha promised that we'd be safe and that Shaggydoag would protect me. But they hurt her and killed him." Tears were welling in Rookon's eyes. Ned hugged his son to his breast, holding him tight, and tried to share his own strength with his youngest child. "It's all right, lad, I promise you everything will be all right." He knew it was a lie. How could it not be? His son had seen the worst of humanity, seen his only human protector taken from him and killed. Seen his wolf shot with arrows and then viciously beheaded and then taken captive by the Boltons. This will be with him a long time. Perhaps all his life. Ned pulled away and gave his son a brave smile. He abruptly stood. "We'll talk later, when you've had a rest." The father took the boy by the hand and led him down the steps to where the Forresters were mingling. Gregor was hugging a pretty maid in a red-brown gown who had just come out of a curtsy. As he approached, a word quickly went round the group and they turned towards him, bowing or curtsying respectfully. "Please," Ned said, raising a hand, "there's no need for that." Gregor raised his head, smiling. He nodded to his eldest son. Instinctively the rest of the Forrester clan melted back slightly. Roderick Forrester, clad in full armor, turned and offered his hand to the lady in the red-brown gown. The girl was even more striking up close, but, as she took the warrior's hand and straightened gingerly, she kept her eyes fixed demurely on the ground. "My lord," Roderick announced breathlessly, happiness filling his voice, "may I have the singular honor of presenting Elena Glenmore, my betrothed?" "Of course." Ned stepped closer and offered the girl a broad smile as he bowed his own head. "My lady. It is a pleasure to meet you once again." The maid looked confused. She glanced between Roderick and a young man behind her. A fine clean-shaven soldier with a shock of brown hair. He wore hunting leathers and had a warbow looped over his shoulder. "You may have been too young to remember," Ned said helpfully, "but your father brought you to Winterfell on a feast day some years ago. You were older than my daughters, but you played in the Godswood with some of the other young northern ladies, Aelys Karstark and Daisy Mormont." "I remember," Elena said, her voice as soft as silk. "Forgive me, my lord, there were so many people that I didn't presume to think that you would remember the daughter of such a minor house." "There are no minor houses in the north, my lady," Ned replied, his tone assured, a fact borne out by reports of your father's resistance to Lord Ryswell. "The thanks to that belongs to my brother Arthur," Elena said, raising a hand indicating the youth in worn leathers behind her. "When Lord Ryswell commanded us to forswear our allegiance to Winterfell and House Stark, my father gave him command of our elite guard so that he could launch a campaign to keep the vassals of House Ryswell out of our lands." "It was nothing, my lord," Arthur Glenmore stated humbly as he bowed to Ned. "My father had already gathered our men to counter the attacks by the Ironborn across the stony shore. It was a small matter to keep the Ryswell men back." He gave a small grin. "Though I am grateful that you opened up a second front by coming through Moat Cailin," he tuned to Lord Gregor's son, "and to Roderick who rode to our rescue just as we were being overrun. With the extra men we were able to smash the Ryswells back and march to aid Lord Forrester as he came from Barrowtown in the east." Ned's face was tight as he asked, "I understand Lord Ryswell perished in the fighting. What of his children?" "Children? More like grown men and women. Roger Ryswell died trying to cross the river to the south of Rillwater Crossing. He took an arrow through the chest and we think he drowned in the waters." Arthur paused, leaving Ned in no doubt that it was the young Glenmore himself who had killed the man. "Roose Ryswell was with his father when they fought our army in the Rills," Roderick Forrester said. "I killed him myself when he tried to cut down my father." Gregor nodded in thanks to his son before taking up the narrative. "I have spoken to retainers of House Ryswell. I understand that Rickard Ryswell was with his sister's forces in the Barrowlands." There was a slight pause. "I do not believe he survived." "So, with Lady Babry's death," Ned spoke slowly, "there are no more members of House Ryswell or Dustin left?" Gregor considered this for a moment. "No, my lord, I don't believe so, though I'd have to check with Maester Ortengrin." Ned indicated his thanks before looking at Roderick and Elena. The couple had sidled up close together with Roderick winding his arm around the waist of his intended. Her head rested affectionately in his shoulder, seemingly not minding the rough armor Roderick was wearing. "Where is Lord Glenmore?" Ned inquired. "I would very much like to give him my regards and thank him for his service." "He would be honored, I'm sure," Arthur answered. "My father is currently at the rear of the column, but he should be here momentarily." Ned turned to the couple. "I suppose, now that the North is all but liberated, you two will make good on your betrothal." The two shared furtive glances as if embarrassed to be questioned by their liege lord. Finally it was Roderick who answered, "Yes, my lord." He looked sheepishly at Elena. "If the lady is foolish enough to have me, that is. Well, I suppose an agreement's an agreement," Elena murmured happily, kissing Roderick on the cheek. His mood improved by the sight of the youngsters. Ned turned to Gregor. "Has a date been set?" "Not yet, my lord," Roderick spoke up. "We were to be married months ago, but the war broke out and your son summoned us south to deal with the Lannisters. I had told Roderick to stay here," Gregor noted, gently chiding, "to guard our home against attackers, but he would hear nothing of it." "My place is with my father and our men," the younger Forrester declared firmly. "With the young wolf and the northern host. When he called, we were all duty-bound to obey." "Young wolf." Truly, I will never get used to hearing Robb being spoken of in that way. Gods, but a short time ago he was a child in swaddling clothes. Your stubbornness almost got our home invaded by Whitehill men and Ironborn scum. Gregor retorted, anger creeping into his voice. "Oh, it was nothing we couldn't handle," Elissa Forrester said casually, slipping an arm around her husband's, "as if Ironroth would ever fall to traitorous ingrates such as those." Well said, my lady, Ned interjected, eager to ensure that Lord Gregor and his son did not continue their argument. He looked once more at Alyssa and Roderick. I feel an apology is in order to you two. Had I not got myself captured and given my son cause to ride south to rescue me, you could have been enjoying your marriage even now. Roderick and Alyssa looked stricken. We meant no disrespect, my lord, the man swore. It was an honor to uphold our oaths to both House Glover and House Stark. It does you credit to say so, Ned said musingly. However, things are out of order. He turned to Lord Forrester. With both your father's permission, I would like to propose that the marriage take place tomorrow. He stopped, considering the matter. I assume you would have had Lord Glover officiate the wedding. Roderick and Alyssa nodded soberly. Gregor sighed. Lord Galbart had already agreed before we headed south, and I am certain his brother would have taken his place when he became lord. Sadly neither of them can be with us, Ned said, grief touching his heart. However, if you'll permit me, I would be happy to stand in for Lord Glover. A small apology for spoiling your original plans. The Forrester and Glenmores looked in astonishment at one another. There was a long moment of shocked silence as they stared at him. It would be an honor, my lord, Roderick said, or making his voice rise an octave. Tomorrow. Elena repeated breathlessly. She looked at Lady Alyssa. I'm not sure that such things can be done in that amount of time. Nonsense, Alyssa Forrester stated firmly. The honor of having the Lord of Winterfell, the Warden of the North, in attendance at a family wedding is not to be overlooked. We can put the servants to it at once. It will require us to move quickly, but it's possible. The Forrester matriarch's eyes had already adopted a faraway look, as if she was picturing the logistical details that would have to be worked through. This one should have been a general. I leave it in your hands, my lady, Ned said kindly, though if you need extra hands I'm sure the host outside your walls will be happy to help if they were offered some extra ale. It had taken a while to settle Rickon into his room. The boy slept uneasily, tossing and turning while moaning for unseen foes to leave him be. Ned had stayed with his son until he'd finally nodded off into a fitful sleep. As he left the two chambers set aside by the Forresters for him and Rickon, he almost collided with Ortengrin, Ironroth as Maester. Reports, my lord, the short Maester announced, sent by Ryder from Winterfell. Are you not receiving Raven's Maester? He asked the other man as he took the scrolls. We are, my lord, but I fear that your Maester at Winterfell has a finite amount and not one that has been trained to fly to us here at Ironroth. That was true enough, Ned considered as he unfurled the parchment. More had been requested from the citadel, but it was likely that a new supply of the dark-winged creatures would be a while in coming. Right now the Maester there was making do with the small number they had brought with them from the south. It made sense that a rider was being used to bring dispatches, what with Ironroth being so close to the Stark ancestral home. He read the messages quickly. So, Harry on Karstark found Hornwood abandoned. Nothing there save women, old men and children. The inhabitants reported that the Bolton garrison fled north towards the Dread Fort. Harry on is giving pursuit, aims to lay siege to Lord Bolton's seat. Satisfied, Ned folded the parchment and tucked it into his belt. He addressed the Maester, tell Lord Forrester that I need to see him before he retires for the night. Of course, my lord. And I would appreciate your directions to the cells. A few minutes later found Ned descending into the bowels of Ironroth. He walked down steep stone steps and narrow corridors until he was where he wanted to be. Most of the prisoners caught during the campaign were being held in a specially constructed part of the encampment, but Ned had asked for this particular prisoner to be housed in Ironroth's stone cells rather than behind a wooden barricade, ensuring that the inmate was confined well away from their men. As he neared the cell, Ned became aware of a light humming, the musical sound echoing in the small confines of the cell. Taking a breath, he walked through the doorway and approached the bars and looked at the person within. Inside, her back propped against the wall on a thin wooden bench with her eyes closed, was a young woman. She had a thin, boyish countenance with short cropped hair and weathered skin. That was remarkable in and of itself, but what really struck Ned though was the hands. They were strong and hardened, used to a rough life at sea. She looks like Arya might do if she is allowed to continue her sword training. The girl sensed his presence. She casually stopped humming and opened her eyes to look at him. She squinted in the torchlight to get a better look at her visitor. Do you know who I am? Direwolf Brooch, clasping your cloak, honest expression with a hint of gullibility. The girl did not sit up as she languidly gave him a lopsided grin. It made her face sparkle. "If I had to guess, I'd say you were Robb Stark." She squinted again, then she leaned back and reclosed her eyes. "Though, if you are, the years have not been kind to you." "Thought they called you the young wolf." He refused to return her smile. "I am Robb's father, Eddard Stark." That got the girl's attention. Her eyes shot open and she took him in. With one graceful motion she had got off the small wooden bench at the rear of her cell and had made her way over to the cell bars. She scrutinized him carefully. "We'd heard you'd been killed," she said cautiously. "Evidently the tales were false. Rumors of my death have been exaggerated." Ned acknowledged. "Would that the same could be said of the crimes committed by you and your men." The girl's face hardened, all curiosity gone. "My men are fighters, warriors. We follow the old way, we pay the iron price." "Call it whatever you want," Ned said, cutting her off coldly. "In the north we call it pillage, rape and murder." Yara Greyjoy snorted, condescension coming off her in waves. "As if the great Eddard Stark has never killed in war." "War is one thing," Ned reasoned, "but I have never invaded another land, save to put down revolt or to safeguard my family from harm." He took a breath. "And never in my life have I forced myself on a woman. And yet my brother tells me you have a bastard." "Jon. The less you mention your brother and my son the better this will go." "Ah, a sensitive subject." I see. The scorn in the woman's voice was as sharp as a knife. "What would you like to discuss then, Lord Stark?" "My men would have you answer for the invasion of Deepwood Motte and the murder of Lady Sybil and her children." The Ironborn blinked. "I will own to the conquest of Deepwood," she said slowly, "but I murdered no one. Some of the garrison were killed when we took the keep, but that was in a fight. These things happen. Afterwards, we treated the captives well. Why then were the Glover children at sea instead of being on land?" "I don't answer to you." Yara spat. "Very well," Ned said, turning to leave, "but you and your men will answer to the Glover vassals for your crimes. They take a very dim view of those who kill women and children." "As do I." The girl cried angrily, suddenly clinging to the bars of her cell. "The sinking of the ship carrying the children was a tragic accident. A storm came up and the ship couldn't make landing before it hit. I lost over 30 men along with a good ship. Hard to tell what she values more, the men or the ship." "Why were they there in the first place?" Ned asked calmly. "You already had their lands, why move them at all?" "I took them with me to the King's Moot on the Iron Islands." "Should I know what that means?" he inquired. Yara sighed. "The King's Moot was called to decide the successor to my father, Balon. I brought the hostages with me to safeguard the territory we had conquered. To serve as proof of my victory. I hoped that it would sway our men to make me Queen of the Iron Islands, the first our kingdom has ever had." She shook with repressed rage. "But I failed. My uncle, that treacherous kinslayer, was proclaimed king and I had to flee for my life. Would this be Euron Greyjoy by any chance?" The girl's eyes flickered in recognition. "That fucking coward. Kills my father and slinks back into the fold while his brother's body is still warm." "Be that as it may," Ned said coolly, "you have justice. Euron Greyjoy is dead." "Dead?" The way the girl said the word implied she did not believe it. "Indeed," Ned confirmed. "He died on the deck of his ship while running from the Red Wine fleet that invaded the islands." This time the girl's face broke out in dismay. "The Iron Islands have been invaded." "More than that," Ned said, taking no pleasure to relaying the news. "The islands have fallen. The forces of Euron Greyjoy were utterly destroyed. Pike was sieged and fell in short order. Furthermore, in the north your forces at Moat Cailin, Torrens Square and the Stony Shore have been routed. Hundreds of Ironborn have been put to the sword." With every word the girl seemed to shrink more into herself. Her face, so vibrant only a moment ago, looked withered and tired. She sank back into the cell and she sat wearily onto the small bed. She said nothing for some time before looking up. "So, the Iron Islands are conquered. Our fleet and people lost." "They are," Ned told her, "though the women and children are unharmed." "Unharmed?" Yara cried furiously. "How can you say that when they are little more than thralls to be used for the pleasure of the invaders?" "That will not happen," Ned promised. "The Tyrell army has strict instructions on that score." He shook his head, and still, you are the last person to complain about your people suffering, not after what you have subjected the North to. Your burning of Deepwood alone would. That was an accident. Yara stormed. A loose torch set fire to a barn where hay was being kept. Before we knew what was happening, we had your men attacking the walls and a fire raging behind us. We could not even get out of the castle. Many of your men did not. Less than 200 were captured in the Wolfswood as they fled. Yara looked down, her face a mask of pain. Why then are you here? I have no ships, no army, nor even a homeland. Tell me, Lord Stark, in such a sorry state, what could you possibly want from me now? One thing, Ned Stark said as he stepped closer, I want your brother, Theon. The girl scoffed as she looked up at him through the bars. Why should I help you? Theon betrayed you and your family, he conquered your family home, you'll have a hard time convincing me your motives towards him are altruistic. They're not, Ned admitted. I want Theon executed for betraying my family. For betraying me. Theon betrayed nothing, Yara retorted, you took him from his home and made him a hostage. Your brother was surrendered by his own father as surety for failing to realize his own, vain, dreams of conquest. My father, Yara said, voice rising in the close confines of the cell block, lost 2 sons in the war. Some might say he suffered enough. Some might also want to speak to the loved ones of those who perished in Balon Greyjoy's failed rebellion. Ned said, his voice cold, your father's suffering was a direct result of his own actions. You will get no sympathy from me. No, I've heard all about the famous Stark coldness, the girl said as she lay back on her bed. What incentive will you give me for helping you? Yara asked snidely. I will not bandy words with you, Ned said, bristling, either you will help me or you won't. He looked around the cell. I would have thought your own circumstances were clear. As you so rightly say, you have no men left free in the north and your forces in the south have been defeated. There is no hope of rescue or ransom. At best you have nothing to look forward to but a life spent in a cell such as this. And how will you change that? The Ironborn asked curiously. I will not, Ned said simply, I merely offer you my gratitude as Warden of the North. The girl rolled her eyes. You make a lousy negotiator. Still she cast her eyes around her cell. As you say, I have nothing to lose. She straightened where she sat and looked directly into his eyes. Theon is dead. He died at Winterfell. I happen to know that is not true, Ned explained. Roose Bolton presented a piece of skin that belonged to your brother as a gift to my son at the Twins. He said he was captured by his son. Yara looked dejected. Well, in that case, why don't you speak to Roose Bolton? The dead tell no tales, Ned replied. Roose and his son were slain in battle. You have been busy, Lord Stark, Yara said, offering him a desultory clap, but, if Theon lives he'll surely be at the Dread Fort. If that's the case, we'll find him, Ned vowed. However, Roose made a deal with your father to sneak assassins into the Twins to kill my wife's brother, Edmure Tully. Clearly a pact was made between the two. Plus, Bolton talked about negotiating with your father and uncles using Theon as a bargaining chip. If he did, I know nothing about it, Yara sighed bitterly. I know nothing of my father or uncles sending assassins to the Twins nor of any pact with House Bolton. If I had, we would have offered more of a united front when you arrived back in the north. Well, in that case, my lady, Ned addressed her, we have nothing further to discuss on this matter. He turned on his heel and walked away. It's a pity, this war should never have happened, Yara called after him. Had we known that you still lived, my father would never have dared invade the north. He remembered the rebellion all too well. You humiliated him in front of the 7 kingdoms. Your father humiliated himself. Ned paused midway through opening the door. He turned back to look at her. And had I known what I know now, what destruction and death your people would cause, also that Balon Greyjoy could call himself a king, I'd have urged my friend Robert to lay waste to the Iron Islands so that they could never fight again. A flicker of cruelty went through him, but he pushed it away. You're right, Yara said, suddenly resuming her examination of the floor. Surprised, Ned faced her, letting the door swing closed. Seeing him still there, the girl laughed, though it was more an expression of pain than mirth. Don't look so shocked, Lord Stark. How do you expect me to feel? When I was young, my father led us into war hoping to earn himself a crown and was soundly beaten. The rebellion costs us hundreds of lives as well as my 2 brothers and the health of my mother. Yara scoffed, and then, not content with leading us to ruin once, he did it again. She shook her head angrily. he and my uncle had this wonderful idea that the North was ripe for the plucking, what with its army away and its lord captured. I told them it was folly, that the North was too vast to be held by our own small forces and too far from the sea to be supplied from home. I was ignored and we were ordered to attack. She gave Ned a defiant look. I am my unborn, the daughter of Balon Greyjoy. I did as I was told. It was to be a glorious campaign. She let forth a deep groan. Instead, it all went wrong. First my idiot brother marches inland and captures Winterfell. Then he executes your sons instead of keeping them as hostages, inflaming the small folk against us. Actually, my sons are not dead, Ned offered. Theon pretended to kill them after they had escaped Winterfell and he was unable to find them. The prisoner's eyes went wide before she threw her head back and laughed. Oh Theon, you useless cunt. Couldn't even get that right. Tears sprung up in her eyes. Then, with our army bogged down, my father dies and Euron promptly picks up where my father left off, just in a different place. He abandons the northern forces in favor of an invasion in the south. She eyed Ned knowingly. That invasion I assume failed. Ned merely nodded. Of course it did. She wiped her face angrily with the palm of her hand. Pointless. That's what it was. All my father's plans have ended in blood and death. How very true. Ned felt old. War is such a wasteful endeavor. Yara Greyjoy took a breath. Our fleet lost, our army gone. There is nothing left of the old ways to fight for. You are very quick to speak so ill of your family, Ned observed quietly. And why not? When have they ever spoken well of me? Yara was red-faced in anger. My father was a nightmare to live with. Wallowing on the failures of the past and the glories supposedly denied him. My uncles both attempted to steal the throne, and then, when Euron was successful in getting himself a crown, he attempted to marry me off to some fat, useless, lump of a man. That's why I came here. Ned did not speak, he merely watched her, examining her as he would a wounded animal. Finally he opened his mouth. You believe then, that what I say is true? She laughed at him. Of course, it makes perfect sense. We were abandoned, the North was never the richest of pickings for the Ironborn. Better to try south where it's richer and a damn sight warmer. Yara Greyjoy suddenly stood and looked clear-eyed at him. I am sorry for the loss of the Lady Glover and her children. I never wanted their deaths. I ask you to believe me. He nodded. Of course you wanted them alive, they were worth far more to you like than they were burnt or drowned. She took his gesture for what it was and then she took a deep shuddering breath. I'd also ask you to consider something else. I can be of use to you, Lord Stark. You would be wise to use me. He was intrigued, despite himself. And what use would that be? She shrugged. I have no lands and even my title is meaningless now, but she raised a finger. I am a fierce fighter with a small army to my name who will fight for me if I ask. What use would I have of a group of treacherous Ironborn who were my enemies less than a moon's turn ago and are now my prisoners? She shook her head, looking suddenly very young. Your friend Robert Baratheon was renowned for turning enemies into friends. Let me bend the knee and I will rise a loyal servant of House Stark. Theon was supposedly loyal. Ned snapped at her. He pledged his oath of loyalty and friendship to my son and then betrayed him at the first opportunity. Theon was a prisoner. Yara started. Is it so wrong that he desired his freedom? Ned repressed a sudden surge of anger. How then are you any different? I am not my brother. Yara declared fiercely. I am loyal to my friends and sincere in my oaths. Judge me as I am, rather than what you think me to be. What you are is an invader, responsible for death and destruction, Ned said coldly. I would not have you at my hearth. My own men will never accept you in our ranks. They see you and your men as thieves and murderers. If it were up to them you'd all be hanged. He turned and walked towards the exit. Yet again, as he opened the door she called after him. Please. There was a hint of desperation in her voice. Please. I'd ask that if someone must suffer for our actions, let it be me. He regarded her sternly. You would take responsibility for your men's actions. For the deaths your men caused either directly or otherwise. She looked at him defiantly. I do not take responsibility. I am responsible. I was in charge of the men you captured. They carried out my orders. If someone needs to be punished, then let it be me and let them go free. Ned looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. He felt something then that he had not expected to feel. Gods, Am I impressed with her? He was both surprised and appalled by the notion. I shall think on your words, he said as he went through the door. The wedding of Roderick Forrester and Elena Glenmore was a happy occasion. The Godswood of Ironroth was packed with troops from the north. Small folk and soldiers, high and low-born, all thronged the trees to watch the union of the two houses before the branches of the ancient weirwood. The Knights of the Vale had been excused, not being followers of the old gods. However, Ned was happy to see that many of the Vale lords still attended along with their soldiers who had served with Roderick personally throughout the war. Though they did not take part in the ceremony, and indeed, many were caught casting furtive glances at the trees of the Godswood, the fact was they were there, showing solidarity with a man they respected. Ned conducted the ceremony, reminiscing about his own wedding, though that had taken place in the September of Riverrun rather than the woods, as his ancestors had done such things. It had been a break with tradition, though Ned hadn't minded. He had wanted to please his new wife. Now though he felt glad for these two northerners as they said their vows before the heart tree. He had been smiling broadly as the couple walked hand in hand from the woods, surrounded by family and friends. The feast took place in the great hall of Ironroth. Long tables had been set up running the length of the hall, with only the high table set across the width of the hall's summit. Ned had heard that Lady Elissa had been torn about where to place him. As Warden of the North and uppermost liege lord in attendance, he should have pride of place, even though the centre of the table was to be occupied by the bride and groom and their respective families. Eager not to cause problems, Ned let it be known that he was content to be seated at one end of the high table where he would be unobtrusive to the rest of the revellers. It is not an insult if I have asked them to place me there. Ned sat beside Rukan, who picked idly at the food set in front of him. More than once he had tried to engage his son in conversation, but, once again, his son was determined to keep his own counsel. I must give him time. The feast went on for hours, although Ned ate and drank sparingly. He spoke to Lords Forrester and Glenmore, swapping old tales and discussing the war. Where to next, my lord? Gregor had asked, now that we have the west. I hardly think this is the time or the place, Gregor, Ned commented cautiously. Pa. Gregor swung his arm to indicate the center of the table where Roderick was allowing himself to be spoon-fed a morsel of rich pie by his new wife. As if they are paying us the slightest bit of attention. Ned saw that the old warrior had a point. Roderick and Elena looked engrossed in each other. As it should be, of course. Accepting defeat, he turned to the two lords. On to High Point, my lord, he stated measuredly. It is the last rebel stronghold to the west of Long Lake. When it falls, we can push on to assist Harry on in taking the Dread Fort and liberating Carhold. Ned turned to Gregor. I will be returning to Winterfell in the morning, my lords, but I require you to push on. He indicated Lord Reed, who was sat with his men at the front of one of the many tables. I will give Howland the command. Lord Reed. Glenmore spluttered. Indeed, Ned said firmly, Harold Hardang is already at High Point with Jasper Redfort, and they have the castle under siege. Now, ideally, I would like High Point to surrender peacefully. Unlikely, Gregor muttered darkly. Gryff Whitehill commands there. He always was a hothead. All the more reason to send a calm commander to take the castle, Ned reasoned. Frankly, my lord, I cannot give you the command. A Whitehill will never surrender to a Forrester, just as you would never surrender to them. You will be Howland's second, Gregor, and he will attempt to first negotiate the castle's surrender, or, if the worst happens, he'll conduct the siege. Very good, my lord, Gregor nodded approvingly. Glenmore too nodded agreement as he rose ponderously and headed back to his seat. Ned could see that many in the hall were eyeing him expectantly. The bedding. He knew this moment could be put off no longer. He quickly stood. Instantly the music died away and the hall turned to look at him. The air of anticipation was so thick it was almost tangible. My lords and ladies, Ned began, raising his voice so it could be heard at the back. I would like to thank everyone for being here today. A special thanks to Lady Forrester and her servants who so ably accommodated us all on this special day. A roar of approval and thumping of table ensued as proper appreciation to the group's hosts was showed. The evening is almost complete, Ned said, but there is just one more thing. The crowd laughed and started to surge forward, only stayed by Ned raising his hand. Actually, there are two matters I wanted to resolve. I was going to do this later, but now would seem to be the time. Ned turned to address the high table. Roderick and Elena. You both come from fine houses. Houses that have demonstrated their loyalty to House Stark. Without good people such as you we could not have hoped to prevail against the forces opposed to us. He turned to Roderick and Gregor. House Forrester has stood at my son's right hand. Fought with him in every battle, stood sure and true. They even protected him when vile traitors surprised us in the home of a supposed ally and defended his injured body from enemies while foes swarmed all around. He turned to face the hall while raising his goblet. Iron from ice. Iron from ice, came the resounding reply. He turned to the Glenmores. Elena sat with her father and brother by her side. They looked nervously at him. House Glenmore was one of those who remained loyal to House Stark after the Bolton Rebellion. You fought off Ironborn and then rebels and never wavered even when your liege lord ordered you to yield. Again he raised his goblet. The river runs true. Another roar and clapping sounded as the words were echoed throughout the great hall. The bride blushed at the flattery and looked down in embarrassment at the table. To Elena's side her brother and father glowed with the praise. Ned smiled at them before becoming somber. I would reward such loyal and leal houses and have thought long and hard about how best to do so. He addressed the hall. We all know that House Glover is now extinct. The members lost in the war. Their service will never be forgotten. He raised his goblet and offered a toast, to absent friends. The audience responded, standing to repeat the toast and take a drink from their own cups. However, if I can be cruel, I wish to set aside our grief for a moment and acknowledge that their passing leaves a void. Ned continued, one that it falls on me to fill. The same can be said of House Riswell, who had lordship over the Rills. Unlike the Glovers, this family were traitors who paid the price for breaking their oaths. Even so, yet again, their passing leaves a void as well. He took a deep breath. Accordingly, as my wedding gift to the families, I elevate House Forrester to lordship of the Wolfswood, filling the role of House Glover. At the same time I elevate House Glenmore to the lordship of the Rills. These lands will now belong to these houses and their heirs until the end of time. There was a shocked silence across the hall. Ned couldn't blame the guests. At a stroke he had raised House Forrester and House Glenmore to a much higher status than some of the other houses present. He knew that the Forresters alone might face envy from Houses Bowl and Branch as well as other clans of the Wolfswood. So be it. They deserve this boon. This war has turned our world upside down and needs must have loyal houses about me. Given time, they will win over the naysayers. The silence continued for a moment, but then the cheering began. It started from one or two people and then, like the pebbles that precede an avalanche, a wave of adulation and triumph went up across the room. Men and women were cheering and clapping. Some slammed the wooden table with their fists in approval, rocking the furniture as they pummeled it enthusiastically. Ned glanced to look at the center of the high table. Lord Forrester and Lord Glenmore looked stunned at the development while the bride and groom looked similarly surprised. The astonishment was mirrored in every one of the family's faces, except those too young to understand. He raised his goblet high. The noise died off at Ned's silent gesture. He offered a wide smile until he had complete silence. My lords, ladies and friends. I give you Roderick and Elena Forrester. Man and wife. The feast continued for many hours and, although Ned retired to his chambers, Ironroth resounded with the revelry until dawn broke and the sun ushered in a new day. Notes. Before anyone starts, I was forced to invent the House Glenmore's words. They happen to be near a river, so there we go. Also, on a side note, I really didn't like some of the comments people made last chapter. The chapter and its contents are fair game, but having a go at each other and calling people names over things like feminism and its proper definition isn't right. This is a work of fiction. It doesn't have real life meaning, it's just supposed to be a good story to be enjoyed, or not, by everyone. So any troll comments will just be deleted out of hand from now on. D. Oh, and Dave, keep on with the Stanislav, my man. Liking the fandom, though I fear you may be disappointed. Chapter 67, Rob 6. Chapter text. He threw the wooden bucket over the makeshift fence and held it steady as he slotted it into place, the crude metal hook snagging onto the heavy wooden board. Obediently his horse trotted over, dipped its head into the food bucket and began to feed. He brushed its face, whispering softly. The horse neighed in appreciation before resuming its meal. Satisfied, Rob turned to the group behind him. You were saying, my lords. Yohn Royce, standing alongside his sons Ander and Robar, looked amused as he cast an eye at Lord Corbray, who seemed agitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Clearly the notion of taking care of one's own mount was a foreign one to some of the highborn. True, he could have given the task to squires, but Rob preferred to look after his own mount whenever possible. "My apologies, my lord," the lord said, uneasily, "but we had no idea you were thinking of making such drastic moves." Rob cleaned his hands on a rag given to him by his squire, scrubbing away the dirt and food that had accumulated after a morning looking after his horse. He looked up at Lord Corbray. "That depends whether you consider my moves drastic or not." He handed the rag back to the boy, who bowed deeply. "I, for one, do not believe that they are." Titus Blackwood, standing off to the side alongside Lord Bracken, spoke up. "I believe that Lord Corbray is referring to the appointment of ladies onto the newly formed small council. It is that notion he finds drastic. Rob said as he walked towards them. "I assume then that you read the wider proposals that the appointments were a part of." "We did," Corbray spluttered. "Mayor Stillowin writes incredibly well, but I hardly think." "Before you proceed further," Rob said, raising a hand in warning, "you would do well to remember, my lord, that the proposal was put together on my orders. They were my words, you read. And yet the Queen's hand could be seen nonetheless." Ander Royce muttered. Rob gave the man a knowing glance. "If you have something to say, sir," he said icily to the heir to Runestone, "you had best say it rather than speak in hushed tones." "Your Grace," Sir Ander bowed his head, "it is this appointment of women to serve on the small council with which we take issue." "That some of us take issue with," Lord Blackwood interrupted, as Lord Bracken nodded from his side. Ander Royce frowned in annoyance. "As my lord says, some of us have an issue with women serving on the small council." "So I see," Rob replied, casting an eye around the group. "What, pray tell, is the concern?" "Well, they are women, your Grace," Ander finished lamely. Rob chuckled mirthlessly. "Indeed they are. I would most like have refused to marry the Queen were she not a woman." "Very droll, your Grace," Lyn Corbray remarked as he stepped out from behind his eldest brother. Lord Corbray looked dismayed at the fact his brother was speaking. "But some of us do not hold women in quite the same regard you do." "No indeed, I have heard quite a few rumors about your own appetites. If the tales are true, nary a squire is safe when you're at hand." Rob looked at him coldly. "Your lack of respect is distasteful, sir." "My brother means no such disrespect." Lionel Corbray was quick to jump in to quell discontent. "He merely argues that such a move is unpopular." "With whom?" Blackwood asked, his voice hard. "With you and your ilk." Lord Corbray looked from the Lord of Raventree to Rob himself. "Your Grace, again I mean no disrespect, I merely voice concerns that appointing a woman to the small council, much less 3 of them," Ander Royce added, "would be a major break from tradition." Lord Corbray finished with a sigh. Rob regarded them all for a moment. The 2 river lords did not look pleased, though from the sentiments Lord Blackwood had been uttering it appeared that the king could at least count on his support. "Bracken's too, if I had to wager." It was the Vallemen that were a problem. Though, even then Lord Royce had yet to weigh in on either side. For a moment he felt a flash of irritation. No representative of the North or the Reach had been brought to this impromptu meeting, and, from the look on Ander Royce's face, it looked as if the Vallemen who had attended were looking most displeased with the River Lord's intervention now that it was clear that they would not support their objections. "If they had the courage of their convictions, they'd call a meeting of all my commanders, not just the ones on whom they thought they could count on for support." He looked at the group. "Is that the view of you all?" "No," Lord Blackwood said plainly. "I was under the impression that we were here to discuss the possible appointment of Lady Caitlin as Lady of Riverrun now that the Lady Rosalind had miscarried her child by Lord Edmure." Sadness hit him. "That child would have been my cousin had it not died in the womb. Unless Uncle Brynden can be prevailed upon to marry, then the ruler of the Riverlands will no longer be named Tully. Hundreds of years of stewardship will end. Much as it has in the Vale." "You had concerns about the makeup of the council, Blackwood." Ander Royce cut in. "Don't bother to deny it." "I would not insult my fellow lords by doing so," Blackwood said, clearly fighting for calm, "though I would clarify that my concerns were specific to the number of positions going to people from the Reach." He looked up at the king. "Such concerns were voiced before the full scope of your Grace's plan were made clear to us." "And now?" Rob asked, looking curiously at the other man. Now Titus looked pointedly at the Valleman. "I have no objection to the disposition of titles and posts being suggested. Nor do I, Lord Bracken added, and I suspect our fellow Riverlords feel much the same. Lyn Corbray and Ander Royce looked angrily at the Riverlords, who returned their stares with equal hostility. It would appear that Margaery's attempts to win supporters is yielding fruit. Robb walked up the small rise to the Lords. He beckoned to his squire to bring his cloak. "If I might ask," he said as he threw the heavy wolf pelt around his shoulders, "what exactly are my lord's objections?" The Valumen looked at one another before Lionel Corbray spoke. "My lord, we do not feel that it a woman's place to advise on the rule of the realm." "Why do you say so?" Robb asked, maintaining a calm expression as he adjusted his clothes. "What is it about them that causes you such disquiet?" "They are women, your grace," Lionel Corbray said as if talking to a simpleton. "The fairer gender. They are more suited to dealings with affairs of the home than meddling in affairs of state." "You doubt a woman could handle the rigors of ruling?" Robb asked casually. Lionel Corbray sensed the trap and kept silent, but Ander Royce carried on regardless. "Of course. It is not women's place to exercise control over men. Women are allowed to control noble houses," Robb pointed out, bristling with annoyance. "Some of the Seven Kingdoms' greatest houses are ruled by women." "Only in the absence of a suitable heir," Ander retorted. "It is a rare enough occurrence. Rare enough that it need not cause concern." "Regardless, it does happen," Robb noted. "Why am I arguing with this fool? Even now Lady Anya Waynwood sits on the ruling council of the Eyrie. With 2 other lords." Lord Corbray responded, "and only because the majority of the lords are on campaign. Now that Lord Robin has been taken from us, it is only a matter of time until Sir Harold returns from fighting in the north and takes his rightful seat." Yes, indeed, Sansa seems to be counting the days. Since her affections for the young Valuman had become known, Sansa was far more open about expressing her feelings for the heir to the Vale. Robb found the whole ordeal most uncomfortable. He finished adjusting his cloak and fixed Lionel with a frosty glance. "As you know, I have appointed Lady Waynwood as Master of Laws. Are you saying that she is incapable of fulfilling that role?" A look of caution crossed the face of Lord Corbray. "No, your grace, I am sure Lady Waynwood will carry out her duties as well as she can. I would only assert that there are other men as qualified, if not more so." "Why?" "Because they are men." Robb gave a small smile, the humor of which did not reach his eyes. "Sounds to me as if you are afraid of competition." The Lord started. He spluttered for a moment before finally announcing, "No, your grace. Not at all. It is just that your appointment of the lady will be seen as an insult to other men who will believe you are finding them wanting when compared to a woman. It will be as if you are saying they are not as good as her. Then be better." Robb snapped as he shot a cold look at the Lord of Heart's home. Under the withering look of his king, Lord Corbray visibly withered, locking his eyes on the floor. Robb turned to look at the men around him. "Make no mistake, my lords, I am appointing the members of my council based on merit. Merit. I want able people about me, and I care not at all about the gender of the person who gives me my advice." He looked about him. "Can anybody, without jesting, tell me that Lady Waynwood is nor best placed to serve as Master of Laws, or that Lady Olenna Tyrell is not the ideal candidate to have as Master of Whisperers? One has served as head of a house for many years, ruling with justice and respect for the rule of law. The other has a spy network across the realm that is only second to that of the Spider himself. Though it was also behind Littlefinger's own network before he was taken into custody." Robb looked about them all. "Can any of you say that these ladies are unable to carry out the duties I have assigned to them?" There was a pause. Robb's eyes narrowed. "And do any of you claim that the Queen is not capable of ruling in my stead?" The Riverlords shook their heads emphatically. Lyn Corbray looked as if he was about to reply, but then seemingly thought better of it when he saw the determination on Robb's face. Ander Royce though was somewhat braver. "What if, once given such power, the Queen gives contradictory orders to your own?" "She will not," Robb claimed dismissively. "The Queen has my full confidence, my lords. When she speaks, I expect you to act as if I myself had said the words." There was momentary silence, only interrupted when Lionel Corbray stirred. "Your Grace, I beg you to understand. We mean no disrespect to you or the Queen. We have all sworn oaths and we will follow your commands without question." "Evidence to the contrary, my lord." But Lionel went on, "We have just been through the awful reign of Lady Lysa. She murdered the noble Jon Arryn and then subjected the Vale to her own unhinged leadership. What's more, we then became pawns in Baelish's play for power. We do not want the same thing to happen again. It will not. Rob promised, adopting a conciliatory tone. The Queen and my other council members are respected as rational, intelligent individuals. As much as I want to be loyal to my aunt, I must concede that she was none of those things. Agreed, Blackwood intoned solemnly as he glanced at the other lords. We can surely all agree that Lady Lysa has been ill for quite some time. The others nodded carefully. Then Lionel Corbray spoke again. Your Grace, I would ask you about the appointments themselves. Go on, Rob replied, bracing himself. From the initial proposals, Lionel continued, it looks as though you mean to give a great portion of power to people from the Reach. At least 3 of the positions will be taken up by Tyrells alone. It is hardly fair, Andor Royce claimed. There are almost no members of the Vale or Riverlands on the council. Discounting Lady Waynwood, of course. The knight added this last quietly. Rob nodded and looked thoughtful, as if mulling over their concerns. There is still the position of Master of War to be filled. I am considering 3 possible candidates for the new role. Sir Brynden Tully is being considered for it. Rob cast a look at Lord Royce, as is one of your own number. But the third of the candidates is Randyll Tarly, protested Lord Corbray. While the man has done exemplary work in the Westerlands and Iron Islands, if he were to be appointed it would tilt the council undeniably in the Reach's favour. My lords talk as if this was a conflict, Rob said firmly. That is not the case. It is symbolic, Your Grace, Lyn Corbray soothed, his voice as smooth as silk. It could be seen that you were favouring your wife's homeland beyond all the others. Such talk is bound to cause resentment. It seems it already has. Rob turned to regard the man slowly. I thank you for your concern, sir, but it is unnecessary. Each region will have a delegate on the council with authority from their respective warden. I want every region under my banner to be equally represented. Which is why the Riverlands have no objection to any appointments the king chooses to make, Blackwood stated evenly. Every region will be represented. Lionel echoed incredulously. Indeed, Rob said as he prepared to walk away. The small council will have to change its name. It will be at least double in size from its predecessors. The Queen has suggested I call it the King's Council and leave it at that. He turned an eye on the Valyman. What say you, my lords? A wise idea, Your Grace, Lord Corbray replied, admitting defeat. I'm glad you think so, Rob said, his voice becoming hard. For I wish to remind you that the power of the council and its members derives from the king. I will ensure that nothing is done without it being according to my policies. It will be my will that shapes decisions. He took a breath, and stared openly at the men before him, as it will be my decision over who sits on my own council. While I appreciate you sharing your views, I want that last part to be understood. It is Your Grace, Yohn Royce rumbled, speaking for the first time. We appreciate your time and thank you for hearing our— he glared at his son and heir, or should I say, some, of our concerns. You are most welcome, my lords, Rob responded, smilingly. Good afternoon. As the delegation of lords walked away and broke into distinct groups, Rob allowed himself a small sigh and for his shoulders to slump slightly. That was harder than I thought it would be. Your Grace handled that superbly. Rob whirled to take in a figure that had emerged from the tent line some distance away. The man was clad in green velvet and silk with dark hair and a small, well-kept beard. By far the most distinguishing feature of the man, though, was the exquisitely carved cane he used to assist his movement. And you have excellent hearing, Rob told the man. Chuckling, the man walked awkwardly towards the king, his cane offering little assistance in the muddy ground. Your Grace must forgive me listening into such a meeting, the man said as he came to a stop a short way from Rob. He gave a deep bow. I am newly arrived to the camp and wanted to get the lay of the land. I have not met you before, sir. How did you manage to get into my presence without my guards announcing you? I was taught subterfuge by my grandmother, the man replied, his eyes sparkling as he looked around. Sadly, it seems to be unnecessary in this case. Your Grace's men are neglectful enough to not provide you with any protection. Not neglectful, Rob said, defending the Wolf Guard. I assure you they leave me alone only under the greatest protest. He looked around to survey the camp as it heaved with activity around them. Only here, where the multitude of the Northern Horse was crudely stabled, did there seem to be a respite from the frenetic camp activity. I believe, with so many men about me, that I am quite safe. Even so, with the enemy so close at hand, there should still be a guard. The man's eyes were reproachful. Oh, there is, Rob said confidently, Grey whined. In an instant the king's direwolf was at his side, but, instead of looking menacingly at this unknown figure, Rob was surprised to find the creature looking curiously at the man. Greywine sniffed the air and padded forward, smelling the man careful. To his credit the man stayed stock still, though not out of fear as Rob supposed. He idly set his cane in front of him and allowed the wolf to circle him, smelling his boots and legs. After a moment the man knelt, grunting with the exertion, as he brought his head level to the wolf's. He put his hand into the folds of his cloak and retrieved a small hunk of meat wrapped in a silken cloth. Smiling, he offered it to Greywine on an outstretched hand. The wolf paused, smelling the limb before tentatively reaching down and eat the morsel, plucking the food from the man's hand and chewing viciously, the wolf's great jaws working as it shredding the tough flesh. The man stroked the wolf's face as he rose painfully to his feet. He was still smiling. "A most magnificent creature, your grace. The first such creature this far south in centuries, if what I have read is true." Rob frowned in feigned confusion. "I am still puzzled as to how you were able to get so close without being stopped." "You referred to your grandmother." "Ah yes, a most redoubtable woman," the man said. "Not a warrior of course, but what she lacks in physical prowess she makes up for in intelligence and guile." He indicated his cane. "As you can see, I am in need of both." "If she is as intelligent as you assert," Rob commented, "perhaps I should look into whether it would be worth recruiting her to my service." "That would be a novel idea," the man noted, smiling as he did so. "I must warn you though. She is an exceptionally prickly character. Thorny even." Rob nodded as if in understanding. "Well, it was good of you to warn me beforehand." He looked solemn. "I would hate to meet her and be unprepared for such a wicked tongue." "Few men are prepared, even when they have been told," the man said gallantly. "You should not feel unmanned by your experiences." Despite his attempts to prevent it, Rob smiled. "Between your sister and grandmother I am kept ever on my toes." "Ah," the man said, inclining his head, "your grace has seen past my charade, as poor as it was." "I knew who you were the instant I saw you," Rob replied. "There's no one else who has a cane, wears so much green cloth and could get as close as you without challenge by the camp guards." Greywine's reaction confirmed it for me. "Curses, betrayed even when I offer gifts," the man looked down at the wolf. "But you're a clever one, get the prize before telling tales home." Greywine did not respond beyond letting his tongue hang out and panting heavily. Chuckling, the man looked back up at the king. He bowed over his cane. "I believe formal introductions are in order, your grace." The man straightened and stood rigidly, leaning on his cane. "I am Willers Tyrell, heir to Highgarden and acting warden of the South. I have come to pledge my loyalty and offer my services." "You are most welcome, Lord Willers." Margary's brother blanched, his smile fading from his face. "I am not a lord yet, your grace, not until my father's fate has been revealed." Rob was instantly contrite. He nodded sadly. "Of course, forgive my blunder. How then would you like to be addressed?" "Willers seems to suit everyone particularly well," the man replied, his face warm and friendly. "Then Willers it is," Rob said, indicating that they should walk together, at least when no one else is around. They moved away from the horse enclosure and headed down a track that Rob knew would lead towards the Tyrell section of the encampment. In the distance the king could see the full extent of the camp. "Gods, if you ever told me I would command so many men from so many different regions, I'd have thought you mad." Rob walked slowly in deference to Willers's disability, though he found the man was more than able to keep up the pace, his experience with his affliction making up for the injury itself. "I am most glad to see you, Willers," Rob said, looking left and right. "Margary will be as well." "I have missed her terribly," Willers Tyrell replied, concentrating on the task of moving himself across the churned earth. "Have you been to see her?" Willers avoided a patch of treacherous ground. "My first port of call was the royal tent. I was informed by Myra Forrester that the Queen was asleep and was not to be disturbed. I'm sure she would have made an exception in your case." "Perhaps," Willers allowed, smiling thinly, "though I fear that her handmaidens would not." "I don't know what you do to your women in the north, your grace, but Myra Forrester is more frightening and stubborn than all the women of the Reach combined," he chuckled, "not counting those within my own family, of course." Rob smiled at the comment. "Well, we shall have to be sure you are there when she wakens, otherwise I will on the receiving end of her wrath." "A most undesirous place to be," Willers noted, tilting his head sympathetically. "You have no idea. You will be pleased to know that your sister is well." The baby is due any day now. It will be good to see Margaery again, as well as Garland and grandmother. I have felt terribly alone in Highgarden whilst everyone else left to do important work. The king gave him a skeptical look. The reports you sent have hardly portrayed your time in the south as uneventful. Willers tutted in annoyance. The Ironborn invasion was terrible, your grace. The coastal settlements and the Shield Islands have suffered terribly. The man's face took on a haunted look. My fault, of course. How so? I should have strengthened our defenses more than I did. We assumed the threat was in the east from either the Lannisters or Stannis Baratheon. Lord Redwyne was up the coast aiding the campaign in the Westerlands, and we mistakenly thought that the Iron Fleet would be unable to slip round him. He sighed. We were wrong, and our mistaken thinking made things worse. The Iron Fleet evaded the Redwyne blockade and attacked our coastline. We had defenses, but they were undermanned. Father insisted on taking some of our best troops into the east to act as a deterrent to Stannis and to march on King's Landing should you advance on the capital. It was pure vanity, my father's desire for glory overriding good sense. I should have protested more. Willer's eyes closed in pain. When I think of the lives lost on the border with the Stormlands. It is confirmed that Lord Tyrell's army was totally lost, Robb said, careful to keep his tone measured. I am talking of this man's father and his ill-advised attempt to conquer land himself. Willer's look of sadness deepened measurably, almost completely, your grace. He took a deep breath. My father had almost 20,000 men with him when he marched into the Stormlands. Accounts of survivors who made it back to Grassy Vale tell that my father foolishly walked into a trap set by Lord Stannis. Despite having the advantage both in terms of numbers and quality of soldiers, Stannis had the terrain and corralled the vast bulk of my father's force into an encirclement. Almost his entire army was surrounded and destroyed. Barely 2,000 men made it back to Grassy Vale. And your father? Robb asked slowly. Willers made a sound, somewhat close to despair. I regret that there has been no sign of him. Not one of the survivors saw him slain, nor has any news of what may have befallen him. It doesn't help that the battlefield is within the borders of the Stormlands. It makes searching the actual dead impossible. The Targaryens have said they have searched the site but have found nothing to indicate Lord Tyrell's location. The man beside Robb gave him a wry look before speaking. I am grateful for their efforts, but I would ask how they would be able to identify my father. By now any corpses would have been thoroughly looted. Stripped of his finery, my father would look no different than any other middle-aged man. The king nodded in agreement as they walked together in silence. They moved on to another muddy path that intersected the two camps of the Reach and the Vale. Everywhere Robb looked he saw productive activity. Men were honing weapons or sparring with one another. In the far distance patrols rode on horseback, making their way out of the camp on another survey of the surrounding land. It was the model of efficiency, even though it wouldn't have looked it to the untrained eye. As soon as the treaty is signed, we shall ask for lightly armed men to enter the Stormlands and help with the search. Sir Baelor Hightower stands ready at Grassy Vale, your grace, Willers said easily. He only awaits your orders. Robb gave the man a look and then paused. I thought that, in your absence, Sir Baelor had been made left in charge of the Reach. No, your grace, Willers said easily. I have left the Reach in the capable hands of Sir Baelor's father, Lord Lytton. He has even left the High Tower and has travelled to Highgarden so that he may take up his command. He thought for a moment, though I suspect that might be something to do with keeping my mother, the Lady Aeleri, company. She has been left distraught at my father's disappearance. Ah yes, I had quite forgotten that Lord Lytton was Mace Tyrell's good father. I would imagine that having your grandfather tend to your mother gives you some relief whilst you're out here in the field. Quite, Willers replied. It was a trial to leave her. Even news of Margaery's pregnancy was not enough to calm my mother's troubled thoughts. Can't say I blame her. If it was Margaery who had gone missing, I would tear the realm apart until I found her. You needn't have come, Willers, Robb commented gently as they rounded a corner on the path and carried on their journey. Not if your mother needs you. My mother will only recover well when we have news of my father, the other man said simply. My duty is here. Particularly not that you have honored me with the position of Master of Coin. It is me who is honored by your acceptance, Robb commented firmly. In these straitened times we must make sure that the realm's finances are utilized efficiently. They will be, Willers promised. My grandmother has already written to me on this issue. The message found me as I left Tumbleton. It sounds as if the Iron Throne's finances are in dire straits. Rob's face creased in anger. The Dragon Queen reports that the throne is severely in debt to the Iron Bank, the Faith and even the Lannisters. He saw Willers raise an eyebrow. That debt can be discounted of course, but the rest is still outstanding. The debts is in the millions. I see that the Targaryens have not seen fit to mention that they owe House Tyrell a substantial sum as well. Willers remarked, an edge of amusement to his voice. 7 hells. Rob cursed, is there no one in Westeros that King Robert owed money to? I'm sure there must be someone, Willers offered cheerily. His good humor returned. However, I believe that there is a way around this. He drew up and looked at the king. With your permission, your grace, I would meet with the Targaryen representatives and begin negotiation over how best to mitigate these debts. Rob looked at him cautiously. Would you care to share your strategy? Not yet, your grace, Willers said slowly. I would like the chance to meet with the other side first and feel out the ground before I wage battle. Spoken like a warrior, Rob laughed. Willers indicated his injured leg. I may never be able to combat other men physically, but, I promise you, your grace, I more than make up for it on other, more cerebral battlefields. Rob considered. Very well, Willers, you may venture into the city to meet with the dragons. I will order the Lady Brienne to provide an escort. I have my own men, your grace. But none of mine, Rob reminded him, none that ride under the banner of the direwolf. I would have them know that you speak with my authority. Willers gave a quick bow. As your grace wishes. Rob sighed in irritation. Willers, though we have only just met, we are family. I am married to your sister. You do not need to be so formal with me. I ask your pardon, your grace, Willers said gently, but I am forced to disagree. You may be family, but you are also my king. It would be inappropriate for me to act in any way against your regal status. Speaking of which, I must swear a proper oath to you and your crown before witnesses later. You are very concerned about observing the formalities, Willers, the king noted. The man from Highgarden grinned. That comes from a life spent in the Reach, where chivalric honor and rigid formality is a way of life. Rob looked around to make sure they were relatively alone. Did you support your family's strategy of allying with me? To support my crown. If the sudden change of subject and blunt manner of the question fazed Willers, then Rob saw no sign of it. He paused, thinking it through. I will confess, my lord, that when I heard that your mother had arrived at Bitterbridge and that my father had sent Margaery and Garland north to treat with you, I was surprised. My confusion only increased when I heard that you'd been named king in the north by your men. It seemed clear that my father intended to form an alliance with you. The logical conclusion was that father meant for Margaery to seduce you and bind you to us by marriage, he sighed. Father has always been so predictably ambitious. Rob couldn't help but stare in astonishment. You admit your father's plan freely. Even Margaery and your grandmother have never openly admitted it. The ladies of my family are far too subtle, Willers stated, with a shake of his head. No offense, your grace, but even if you were too dim-witted to see it, then you doubtless have people around you who could see through my father's ruse. The idea of offering loyalty before even hinting at marriage was a nice touch. I see Margaery deft hand in that little twist. Why else offer loyalty before marriage? No, no, it makes the whole thing far more palatable to you with your hardened northern notions of honor. However, that being said, I don't believe you would have married Margaery if you didn't love her. A fact illustrated by every letter my dear sister writes to me. Rob's eyes were wide. He had to force his mouth closed. So you admit the plan then? That it was all a scheme? I shouldn't feel outraged. Mother warned me of the Tyrells, but even so it is a surprise to have the man confess it. I admit that it was my father's plan. Willers clarified. Margaery and grandmother are quite another matter. We had all heard how impressive you had been in countering Lord Tywin. I believe they saw in House Stark the only power that our family could support in their bid for the throne, at least of the contenders who were then in the field. And there is the irony, Rob spat, bitterness filling his voice. I have never desired the crown. I was raised to be Lord of Winterfell. I have never wanted anything else. He cast his eyes onto the ground. The idea of the throne scares me senseless. As it should, Willers declared. Those who want the throne always make the worst rulers. A sensible man should not see the crown as a prize but as a burden. Margaery tells me that she sees that understanding in you. It is one of the reasons she loves you. The man leaned heavily on his stout wooden cane, and, mark my words, she does love you. Very much. Robb felt his face redden. He had meant his blunt question to flatfoot Willers, trying to make him reveal how he really felt about serving Robb. The king had wanted to see if Willers would be honest with him. Now, though Willers's answers had embarrassed Robb and made him feel uneasy about the subject matter while Willers himself appeared unruffled. Margaery's brother and Lady Olenna's grandson indeed. As it is Willers concluded, it is irrelevant. The suggested alliance between your side and that of the Targaryens will means that each faction controls their territory until a marriage can be organized between the heirs of each house. He smiled warmly at Robb. I hear nothing but good reports about you, Your Grace. I am sure you are up to the task. He bowed his head. To answer your question, I believe we were right to support you as king. The king coughed to clear his throat, a more florid and detailed answer to my question than I had intended when I asked. Willers laughed. I suspect that was a result of my upbringing in the Reach as well. Tell me, Robb instructed as he indicated they should carry on their walk, has your grandmother shared my plans in terms of the formation of the council? She has, Willers said, sucking in a breath as he forced himself onwards. I have to say that is an impressive idea. If it works it should provide sound governance. I have a concern though. Go on, Robb urged. You have created the post of Master of War, who will be in command of the royal army that you intend to form. It will be a relatively small force, Robb cut in, no more than a few thousand well-trained men that can act to secure the king's peace. A novel idea, Willers commented. Any more than that and the cost of maintaining the force would be prohibitive. That was our thinking, Robb replied. Curses, betrayed the fact that it was both Margaery and my idea. Still, Willers is smart enough to have realized that that was the case anyway. As I say, a good idea, Willers said quietly. The start of any new regime is likely to be fraught with rebellions and discontent. An army loyal to the crown will likely scorch such activity before it can begin. He licked his lips. However, my concern is the position of Master of War itself. Oh? Robb asked, curious. Traditionally any royal host has been commanded by either the king or his hand. The creation of a new seat on the small council is a break from this. Essentially it separates Hans' role, dividing the domestic element from the military one. You are creating a very powerful role that just has the military aspects without any of the other drudgery. Small wonder that many of the High Lords want it. You speak of Randyll Tarly. Of course, Willers declared. Do not misunderstand me, Your Grace. I have nothing but respect and admiration for the Lord of Hornhill, but he knows he'll never be given the position of hand. He would be a poor administrator in peacetime. However, the new role of Master of War will give him everything he desires in terms of power, a seat on the council and control of the realm's military. A Tarly can hardly ask for more. And he is just one of a few who would covert the role. I am aware, Robb said carefully. In his heart he suspected that was why Yohn Royce had been so conciliatory earlier. What would you advise? Well, Your Grace, Willers said, carefully thinking over his words, it is possible you could forestall Lord Tarly's ambitions by appointing him to the post of Warden of the Westerlands. No one could doubt he deserves it. And give control of the Westerlands to the Reach. The Riverlands and Vale will have a fit. Lord Royce has suggested that I appoint Lord Tarly to be Warden of the Iron Islands, the king noted. We expect someones to follow Aeron Greyjoy's lead and spark a rebellion very soon. The rebellion led by the youngest sibling of Balon Greyjoy had been put down almost as quickly as it had arisen. Aeron had led a small group of Ironborn warriors along with his own band of drowned men on a series of hit-and-run attacks on the Reach soldiers garrisoning Pike. Paxter Redwyne, the current commander of the Reach's army there, hit back hard and fast, blanketing the island with troops, driving the rebels from their lairs and slaughtering them to the last man. Aeron had been the last one to die, diving from a cliff into the cold water below, a dozen of arrows perforating his flesh. His body washed up on the shores of Pike the next morning, blood still tainting his tattered robes. Willers considered what he had been told. It is true that Lord Tarly would be an appropriate warden for that region. While a harsh and unyielding man, he is also fair. However, the Ironborn retain their pride and stubbornness. Though beaten, they are not utterly defeated. If you mean to pacify the region and not drive the people to rebellion once more, then Randyll is not your ideal man. There will be some in the North and Riverlands who believe that it is not worth the struggle, Robb noted. They want the Iron Islands destroyed utterly, fearing that to not do so will only condemn future generations to further rape and pillage once the Ironborn have recovered. It's certainly a possibility, Willers agreed. However, I believe that Margary's plan of turning the islands into a trading hub has merit. Show that what can be obtained through trade and commerce with no fear of death, and they may well come round to our way of thinking. If not, well, their fate is for your grace to decide. In either event, Lord Redwine has proved to be an able man. I suspect he will serve you well as warden of the islands. You are aware that I have appointed him as master of ships. But of course, Willers answered smoothly. However, given that a great deal of his responsibilities will likely encompass the Iron Islands, I cannot see why he could not hold both roles. Unfortunately, I have need of Lord Redwine elsewhere, Robb stated evenly. Lord Jason Mallister of Seaguard will serve as warden of the Iron Islands. Forgive me, your grace, Willers gave a slight bow, but doesn't House Mallister have generations of grievances with the Iron Islands? Might that not give him cause to be somewhat overzealous in his duties to pacify the people there? Perhaps, Robb said grudgingly. However, Jason Mallister is a man of honor. He has years of experience with dealing with the Ironborn. Upon his return to the south, I will make appointment and free Lord Redwine to take up the post as master of ships. Willers decided to leave the Point and the Westerlands. I have yet to decide who will be my warden there. Frankly, there are many components to that decision. Robb's words sounded fake, even to him. The other man appeared not to notice. I am sure your grace will arrive at a just decision. The men carried on. They approached the palisade that made up the outer perimeter of the camp. Robb was surprised to see that they had traveled so far. I was distracted by the conversation. He motioned that they should turn back the way they had come. Come, Willers, I'm sure Margary will be awake now and will want to see you. They passed Greywind, who looked at them both as if they had gone mad. He's just seen us walk all the way down here before turning around and walk back the other. No doubt he finds us a ridiculous sight. Mayhap he has the right of it. I have a slightly odd task that I want you to undertake, Willers, Robb said, finding the man's request not to be given his father's title somewhat awkward. I am your grace's humble servant, Willers said, curiosity in his voice. Since you are to visit the capital, I would have you research a particular subject. It is a tricky task and one that must remain private between us. Nonetheless, if Margary's assessment of you is true, I believe you are the right man for this job. Your grace intrigues me, Willers replied. What is it that I am to research? Dragon law, Robb said simply. Dragons have returned to the realm for the first time in generations. I would know everything about them. We have all heard the myths, but we are sorely lacking in facts. Since the Targaryens lived in the city for many years, I must believe that there is no better place, short of Dragonstone and Old Valyria, where knowledge might be found. No doubt this time the man did look surprised. Is there anything in particular you would have me research? How to control them, for example? Oh no, good brother, Robb said without a hint of a smile. I want you to devise a way to kill them. They were still talking a short while later when their conversation was interrupted by Brian, who came riding hard between the tents yelling for her master. Your grace. Robb waved to make himself visible. Here, Brian. The warrior woman saw the gesture and rode hard towards him, pulling up shortly and dismounting with practiced ease. Your grace. If it's that urgent, she would not have dismounted. Easy, Brian, Robb said, sharing a smile with Willers. What's the problem? It's the Queen, your grace. Brian was breathlessly. The baby is coming. Robb's whole world froze. Brian carried on speaking at him, but he seemed not to hear. She might have been telling me the meaning of existence and I would not have heard. Wordlessly he took the reins from Brian's outstretched hand and proceeded to climb onto the horse. With nod of thanks he wheeled his mount and charged away. His thoughts were a jumble as he hurtled his way back through the camp. He cried out at soldiers to move aside as he rode unimpeded down the dirt tracks that spread through the camp like the tributaries of a river. Within moments he burst onto the main track and was making quick progress towards his command tent. The heavy grey canvas filled his vision as he urged his horse ever onwards towards his goal. Men, horses and tents whizzed past him in a blur as he thundered past, paying no one or thing any mind as he rode. Before he had realized what was happening, he had pulled the horse to a stop outside his tent. With a quick kick he was out of the saddle and had thrown the reins to a waiting squire, paying no attention to the lad's quick reflexes as he deftly caught them in midair. Ignoring the two wolves guard on duty and the fire blazing outside which warmed a multitude of pots of water, Robb entered the tent. The first thing he noticed was that the partition that ordinarily divided the tent had been moved so that the majority of the space had been given over to the area containing the king's and queen's bed. The rest of the furniture, the table, the chairs, even the chests of clothes has been set aside the canvas wall where they would provide no obstruction to the people coming and going. He stepped to the partition entrance and spied what was going on inside. What was inside was pandemonium. People rushed about this way and that. The queen's handmaidens, wearing simple gowns, were bringing in water and linen. To one side Maester Lewin was standing by a small table calmly setting out his equipment from his ever-present satchel. The sight that drew Rob's attention was Margaery, wearing nothing but a simple shift, was laying on her bed taking calming breaths. A young girl, her long thick auburn hair tied back, was holding the queen's hand and talking soothingly to her. With a start Rob realized that the girl was his own sister. "Are you all right, Your Grace?" Sansa breathed quietly. "Sansa?" Margaery gasped, "I have told you before. To you, I'm just Margaery." Sansa looked down in contrition. "I'm sorry, Your Grace." Despite her condition, the queen laughed, the merry sound cut off with a short intake of breath. "Excuse me, Your Grace," a voice spoke from behind Rob. Keeping his yes locked on his wife, Rob turned slightly to admit two handmaidens, who were carrying more linen and water. One of the girls tutted in annoyance, but it was a quiet rebuke and Rob dismissed it. He had more important things on his mind. "Rob, don't stand there, you're blocking the doorway." The king did move his eyes this time. Taking in his mother, who wore the same simple clothing as her daughter and the rest of the other handmaidens, he silently stepped back as he anxiously stepped back to let yet another servant through the entrance. "Is she all right?" "She's fine, Rob," Catelyn said, stepping beside her son and placing her hands on his shoulders. "The baby got a start on us by announcing it was coming while the queen was asleep. We only discovered what was happening when she woke to cramps. But, aside from the very small task of giving birth, she's absolutely fine." Rob ignored his mother's sarcastic tone. Giving her a reassuring smile, he walked into the room and came to his wife's side, going down on one knee so that he was hovering near her head. "Margaery." His wife's head moved to the side. She smiled as she saw him. "About time you got here." "I came as fast as I could," Rob assured her, taking her hand and stroking her forehead gently. "I was with your brother, Willers, discussing the future." "Willers is here?" Margaery asked, eyes shining. "He is," Rob confirmed. "He is most anxious to see you." "Sadly, I am a bit busy at the moment." Margaery looked down at her belly. "There are others who are very demanding of my time." "He'll be here when you're done," Catelyn said from the foot of the bed. "Your grandmother is on her way as well." "There's no rush, my lady," Maester Lewin spoke as he moved alongside the bed, nudging Sansa aside so that he could examine the queen. "We are still some way away from the birth itself." The king frowned. "I thought that the baby was coming." His tone was outraged at the implication he had been lied to. That his mad rush here had been for naught. "It is," the old man said gently, his calm demeanor soothing Rob's frayed nerves. "However, we still have a lot of time to wait." His hand moved gently over the queen's naked belly. "I can report, however, that things are progressing nicely." "What the blazes does that mean?" At Rob's look of confusion, the maester offered him a reassuring smile. "You shouldn't fret, Your Grace. If you remember, we discussed the various stages of childbirth." "We did," Rob admitted, somewhat gracelessly, "but I must confess it's quite gone out of my mind right now." "Understandable," Lewin said, placing a comforting hand on the king's shoulder. "Do not be concerned. Just let us take care of everything. If we need." A shrill voice rang out, "Get out, you beast. Out, I say." The voice had come from the outside section of the royal tent. Suddenly the voice came through again. "Out. Get out." "What in the seven?" Catelyn moved away from the bed and went through the gap in the canvas. For a moment there was subdued conversation, but neither side seemed to be giving much ground. Sharp exclamations of anger occasionally came through. Both Rob and Sansa looked worriedly at the partition wall, as if they could divine what was going on in the other side. "And there I was thinking having this baby out here would be a peaceful experience," Margaery said with a wry smile, "so calm and tranquil." Rob was about to try and say something when another commotion erupted. "Out, Grey, wind out." Catelyn's cry could be heard through the partition. "Out now." "I'd better deal with this," Rob whispered to Margaery as he left her bedside and walked briskly to the outer section of the tent. Standing in the center of the second, now much smaller section of the tent was Greywind, his hackles raised, his teeth bared at some imaginary foe. Before the wolf, with her arm outstretched, was a woman clothed in the traditional robes of a Septa. She had a pox-scarred face and she was bellowing defiantly at the wolf as if the mere volume of her voice would make the creature turn and run away. Out! Caitlin was alongside the woman, her hands raised imploringly at the Septa as if trying to get the woman to withdraw and let her handle the situation. "What is the meaning of this?" Rob asked coldly, a little exasperated at the sight of the women arguing with an animal while his wife was about to undergo an ordeal. "Others take me, what is going on?" The Septa did not move to acknowledge him, indeed she only seemed to have eyes for the wolf that was snarling angrily at her. Once more she pointed at the creature. "This beast has no place here. That beast has a name." "I do not care," the Septa said flatly, "I want it gone." White-hot anger dissolved Rob's nervousness and anxiety. He felt his eyes narrowing, his face freeze. "Who in seven hells do you think you are?" The portly woman rounded on him then, but only the head moved, the rest of her body still faced Greywind, clearly unwilling to show her back to the animal. If she was moved at all by the realization that she had been remonstrating with the king, the woman showed absolutely no sign of it whatsoever. Instead her face was firm as she addressed Rob. "That thing is a wild beast and has no place being in a tent during childbirth." Recognition struck Rob. "Ah yes, this is the pet Septa that Margaery brought with her from Highgarden. Been with her since she was a girl." The woman had proved to be an annoyance to the servants at Riverrun and the twins. She has found reason for complaint at almost everyone and everything she has encountered since arriving in the Riverlands. She ordinarily seemed a nice enough woman, Rob recalled, she had even cried at the royal wedding. But now he was seeing another side to her, a side he did not care for at all. "Beg pardon, Septa Hysterica," Myra Forrester's voice called softly from the side of the room. "But he just needs settling, he won't be in the way." "Quiet, girl." Hysterica snapped, "What could you possibly know of this? The beast has petrified the handmaidens, this is no game." "He is just confused," Caitlin said firmly, "there is great activity and all he can hear is the wife of his master in distress." "Well, he will get no further in here," Hysterica declared, her hand on her hips. "The beast is a menace and I will not have him bothering the queen. Not like he has the girls." It was then that Rob noticed the number of people who had retreated against the tent wall. At least 4 of Margaery's servants, her cousins, but the look of it, were watching in terror at the threatening wolf. Only Myra, Saya and Jane Westerling were moving about unperturbed. 7 hells. What has got into them? They know Greywind, he is a regular fixture of both the camp and the tent. How can they be afraid of him to the point of inaction? Then he looked dispassionately at the creature. Greywind looked beside himself with anger and frustration. It was a fearsome sight. No doubt the girls had heard how the wolf could slice a man's leg off with one bite and were no willing to get close enough for him to repeat the action on them. This must end. Rob strode forward, he snapped his fingers and pointed at the floor. "Greywind, heel." The dire wolf looked at him in confusion but, slowly, brought his back legs in under himself so that he could sit on the rugged floor. Rob spent a minute looking determinedly into the wolf's eyes before he turned to the handmaidens. "Everyone go about your business. There is nothing to be worried about. Greywind will not harm any of you." Tentatively the girls peeled away from the wall and began. "The Septa was not placated, I must insist that you make the creature." "For future reference," Septa Rob said icily, "the creature's name is Greywind and I am the king. You will address us by our names and titles." The homely woman swallowed carefully. "Your Grace, I apologize but..." "That will be all," Septa Rob said firmly, "the queen has need of you now." With a haughty look of outrage the lady turned on her heel and walked into the bed area. Not sparing her a second glance, Rob reached down and gently stroked the wolf's head. "What has got you so on edge, boy?" The wolf looked at him as if the answer was obvious. That Rob would only see the issue if he would but open his eyes. With a brief chuckle Rob maneuvered the wolf to the side of the tent opposite the opening that led to where Margaery was laying. "Stay," he commanded, quickly kneeling by the wolf. "You can see her from here, everything is all right. But you must stay here." Very slowly, as if expressing his dissatisfaction with Rob's command, Greywind got down on his haunches, watching events carefully as if expecting trouble. Sighing, Rob rose. He gave Greywind a last look before he turned and re-entered the bed area. He paid the others no mind as he walked over to the bed and resumed his position next to his wife's head. Her hand sought his and grasped his fingers tightly. "What is the matter with him?" Margaery asked. "It's nothing," Rob soothed, bringing his lips to her knuckles. "He just got upset knowing that something's happening to you." "Maybe he shouldn't stay," Margaery said with a slight smile. "He may not like what's to come." Her face became deadly serious and she leaned up to the king's ear to whisper, "I'm scared, Rob. So terribly scared." His wife's eyes were wide, seeking comfort. Rob fought to keep his face calm and reassuring. "You'll be fine, my love. You are brave and strong. Everything will be all right. I promise you." "Perhaps your grace would care to wait outside." Maester Lewin was standing near the bed looking at them both. "I promise you we will take care of the queen." Margaery looked at Rob with tears in her eyes, though she smiled bravely. Rob brought his forehead to his wife's before looking at the man, the very man who had brought him kicking and screaming into the world. "If I stayed right where I am, would I be in the way?" The women in the room stopped to stare at him. Both Sansa and Casterly looked at him in shock. Disapproval came off Septon Hysterica in waves. For his part, the Grand Maester merely gave a knowing smile. "No, your grace, if you promise to stay where you are and support the queen, then we shall have no issues." "I promise." "I mean it," Rob Lewin said, glaring intently at the young king. "I won't have you barking orders and overruling the servants. In this room you are not the king. You are not the mighty young wolf. You are not in charge. You must defer to those with experience and knowledge." "What I am is a husband who loves his wife and a father who loves his child," Rob said, clear-eyed. "I promise you, Grand Maester, I will do nothing to cause either of them harm." "I will second that," Maester Caitlin said, looking sternly at her son. "Then you may remain," Lewin declared, turning back to gather some tools from the small table. "Grand Maester, I must insist." "What you must do," Lewin snapped, "is see to your charge. Nothing else is of consequence." Open-mouthed, the Septa silently went about her work. As preparations went on all around them, Rob curled closer to Margaery, gently kissing her face. She was gazing at him. "You stayed," she said in wonder. "I stayed," Rob confirmed, "and I will be here throughout. No matter what." He looked lovingly at her. "You once told me that waiting behind the lines while I fought a battle was the hardest part of our marriage so far." "Well," he smiled wistfully, "I am not as strong as you. I will not wait behind while you do battle. I will be right by your side, offering my love and support." "That is all I will ever need," Margaery said slowly. "All I want is for this to be over and for us to be a family." "Then come," Rob said, taking a firm grip on his wife's hand, "let us face this together." It was hours later. Darkness had fallen and an eerie silence had descended over the camp. Men walked quietly here and there, unwilling to even speak loudly lest they disrupt the spell that seemed to pervade the men of the host. Everyone knew what was happening and there seemed to be something comforting in silence. Men close to the tent had reacted in shocked surprise as the queen's cries of exertion and pain had reverberated through the night, unnerving the inexperienced men that had not heard their own wives or sweethearts going through something similar. At one point the cries became nothing more than guttural moans rather than the utterances of anything that could have passed itself off as human. The Wolf Guard, true to their training, stayed at their posts. Faces impassive as the woman they protected cried and cried as she battled to bring her child into the world. Their commander, Brian of Tarth, had entered the outer tent hours before and had stood rigidly to attention while her mistresses labored within, hoping to at least offer silent comfort. She was joined in vigil by Willers, Garlan and Olenna Tyrell, who all sat looking grimly at one another as the night wore on. They were joined in the early hours by Sansa, who had been exiled from the bed area when the experience had become too much for her. The girl had huddled into Olenna Tyrell's embrace and they sat with the older woman stroking the young girl's hair. Then, just before dawn, the silence was broken by the small cries and wails of a child. So quiet was the camp that the noise reached several tents down, startling the occupants out of their night's sleep. Then the sound cut off. People grabbed one another and shushed their fellows in an attempt to hear. After a moment the noise carried on, unabated this time. There was no doubt, a child had been born. Grand Maester Lewin wrapped the newly cleaned infant in the blanket offered by Myra Forrester. An instant later the child was covered and warmed. The crying ceased a second after and the old man looked down at the small red face. For a moment the maester was overcome as he looked at the baby, so taken was he with the idea that he had been there at the moment this child's father was born. Quickly getting a hold of himself the old man turned and approached the bed. "May I present your child, your grace? A beautiful baby boy." Queen Margaery reached up carefully and took the swaddled child into her arms. Gently, as if afraid it might break, she brought her child to her chest. She knew she looked a state. Her tears had long since mingled with her body's sweat that had flowed from her as the labor persisted for hour after hour. She settled back carefully onto the bed's pillow looking contentedly into her son's face. She looked up. "Is he all right?" she asked through tears of joy. "He is, your grace," Lewin said. "As far as I can tell he is one of the healthiest babies I have ever had the honor of delivering." Margaery nodded, her gaze lost in the small feature of the bundle in front of her. She turned to Robb who was still at her side, looking tired and yet energized as he looked down at his son. "Look, Robb. Look at what we made." The king's smile was as bright as the sun as he moved forward to kiss the baby's forehead. The bundle stirred at the touch but then settled back down. Robb moved his lips to Margaery's cheek. "I am so very proud of you, my love." The queen gave a dazzling smile as she pulled her child close to her. Robb took them both in before looking up. Lewin and the handmaidens were smiling at the three on the bed. Catelyn was wiping her eyes but tears still streamed unabated. Even Septun looked emotional, her cheeks wet and her smile radiant. "Thank you all," Robb said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for your efforts. We will never forget it." Almost as one the group bowed and backed out of the tent, leaving the royal couple alone. Catelyn came forward to look at her grandson. She smiled sweetly and kissed the child's head. "Thank you for your help," Mother Margaery said, sincerely. "Oh no, sweet daughter, there's no need," Catelyn said, straightening. "Seeing that little one alive and well is all the thanks I will ever require." Still smiling, the Lady of Winterfell bowed and made her way outside. Alone, the king turned to the queen. "You were wonderful, my love. I've never seen anything like it." "From someone who's seen dragons, that's quite a compliment," Margaery jested, still smiling at the baby. "It was nothing, not for this one." She cuddled the child to her breast. "They'll be waiting outside," Robb said, casting an angry look at the door, silently rebuking those that would interrupt their family time. "Yes they will," Margaery said. "I'm too tired to move." "You'll have to go on your own." "Really?" Robb said, concerned. "Are you well?" "As well as I can be," his wife promised. "I'm just so tired." "You go now and when I'm up and about we'll present ourselves as a family." The king looked uncertain. "We could just wait until later." "No." Margaery said firmly. "Show the men the new heir. Show them the grandchild of Eddard Stark and the son of the young wolf." Robb nodded. He stroked the grey blanket that enveloped the baby's body. "If I am to go out there we will need a name for the lad. Any thoughts?" Margaery asked, gently rocking the child who looked at her curiously with wild blue eyes. "I always imagined I would name a son of mine after my father," Robb mused, "but with him alive and, gods be good, with many years of life left it seems to be tempting fate to name a child after him." "But it must be of the north," Margaery declared forcefully. "This one's bannerman will come from across the Seven Kingdoms but his home will always be the north." "What of the Reach?" Robb inquired softly. "It will be a home naturally," Margaery allowed, "but the north will be where his most loyal men come from. I have seen how the men treat you and your father. It is something my own father never achieved. Besides, Highgarden will go to Willers and his children, or those that Garland has. This is your son Robb, he's a Stark, a child of Winterfell." Robb looked down at his son, using his finger to fold the blanket back, away from the face. "Ricard," he breathed softly. "We should call him Ricard. After my grandfather." "I like it," Margaery nodded in agreement. "It is a good name, used in the south as well as the north. No one will take offense at it." She shifted the baby in her arms. "And how could you possibly offend anyone? You'll be a charmer like your father, won't you, little Ricard?" In answer the baby cooed contentedly. "Except the Targaryens," Robb observed. "They may well see me naming our heir after the man the Mad King had murdered as an insult to their rule." Margaery considered without taking her eyes off her child. "Let them. It was not intended as such and we can't control what people think." It is a good name and our choice. Well said. He looked between his wife and son, reluctant to break the moment of the three of them together for the first time. Abruptly, Margaery twisted, proffering the baby to him. Take him now, Robb. The sooner you go the sooner you will be back. He reached down and took the baby gently from his wife's arms. He quickly nestled the child into the crook of his arm, adjusted the blankets to make sure the baby was warm and secure. Once done he looked over at his wife. I'll return in just a moment. The queen nodded bravely, though there was tears in her eyes. Not wishing to prolong the agony, Robb stepped through the opening and into the outer tent. They were all there. All the family and lords who currently in the camp. Some were fully dressed, others had clearly just been pulled from their beds. Before he could say a word, Catelyn and Sansa approached and were making a fuss out of the bundle he held. Immediately enraptured by the baby. Off to one side were the Tyrells. All three had stayed up all night, not resting as Margaery had fought to give birth to the newest addition to the family. Gods be good, I had no idea that Olenna Tyrell could smile so broadly. Have you decided on a name? Catelyn asked as she stroked the cheek of the baby. Rickard, Robb answered firmly, feeling love and pride in his chest, the emotion of the moment threatening to choke him. He is called Rickard. A fine name, Olenna noted, standing from her chair with the assistance of Garlan. From a noble lineage. Margaery is resting, Robb said, indicating the bed area with his head. I'm sure she would be grateful to see you all before she sleeps. He looked over at the tent entranceway where Brian stood looking tired but defiant, as if fighting sleep. Are there many out there? The warrior bowed her head. There are a fair few, Your Grace. They have all gathered to share the celebration. As Robb moved to the tent's opening, he turned to the family, smiling as he did so. Today is a day for celebration. There will be a mighty feast this evening with ale, wine and good food. All will be funded at the crown's expense. Of course, Your Grace, Lewyn spoke. We shall see to it all. Very good. Robb smiled gratefully at the Grand Maester. I will never be able to repay what I owe that man. The worst part is he wouldn't even accept a reward if I offered it. Shaking his head of his distracted thoughts, Robb took a deep breath and stepped into the morning light. The cheers and hollers hit him instantly. The shouting beginning as soon as they saw their king exit the tent. He was momentarily blinded by the sun that was cresting the hills to the east and beginning to shine down on the encampment. Blinking, he strode forward onto a clear piece of land just by the campfire which, starved of fuel, had been allowed to slowly burn down. Robb smiled as he looked about him. Everywhere he looked he saw happy and cheering men. Some held their weapons aloft and were chanting a battle cry. In his arms the baby started awake and was looking uncomprehendingly as the noise battered its tiny ears. A moment later, having decided that it did not like the sounds, the baby drew breath into its small lungs and cried furiously. However, so loud was the crowd that Robb could barely hear his son above the tumult going on around him. He smiled as he held his son up for all to see. The cheers intensified as more and more of the assembled men caught sight of the new heir to the throne. Robb smiled in wonder and gratitude that the gods had so blessed both him and his family. Somewhere inside the tent, if she was awake enough to hear the noise, Robb knew that his wife, his queen, was smiling as well. Chapter 68, Cersei 8. Chapter text. The small stone room was cold and forbidding. The only furniture a hard bed and a small table onto which a bowl of fresh water had been set. There had been a chair, but she had destroyed it on her first night in this dismal place, smashing the flimsy wood against the unyielding wall in her frustration at once again being imprisoned. Her captors had said that, as punishment, they would not allow her to have another. For now she must make do sitting on the edge of the uncomfortable bed. She could have sworn that her jailer took a perverse pleasure at the small inconveniences she was inflicting. Septa Unella, that sour-faced bitch. That one needs a long, slow fucking and no mistake. A gust of wind came in from the room's only window, a small barred slit in the stone that was set to the top of the room, so high that she could not see out of it even when she stood on the bed. She knew that her room was set just below ground level, but there was no way to see outside. How has it come to this? I was once Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, mother of a king and a daughter of Tywin Lannister. She was a lioness of the rock. Who were these little people to treat her this way? In the dim light Cersei's eyes narrowed. I am still a lioness of the rock. And soon those who have imprisoned me, and the whole realm, will hear me roar. They had dragged her here kicking and screaming barely an hour after the trial where the Targaryens had offered her up to the High Septon. Like a prize piece of meat at a feast. Thoughts of vengeance had occupied her thoughts of late. Ever since Joffrey's death she had been consumed with the idea of plucking the enemies from their high thrones and bringing them low. Her thoughts had swirled with ideas, mixed with the copious tears produced from the hours of weeping. She had not cried when they imprisoned her in the Red Keep, had not wanted to give her enemies the satisfaction of seeing her emotion. But when she had learned of the deaths of first Joffrey, then Jaime and now Tommen, her weeping had been uncontrollable. Most of my family is dead. Only Myrcella remains. Such thoughts took her back to that fateful day when she was a child, when Cersei and her friends, Jane and Melaea, had visited a fortune-teller from Lannisport. Jane had run away after only one look at the old woman, but the other two girls, being braver, decided to stay. It was a decision they had both regretted. The fortune-teller had predicted Melaea's death that same evening and told Cersei that she would never marry Prince Rhaegar, though she had not understood that at the time. That, however, was not the end of the prophetic ramblings of the old fraud. What followed was an awful prophecy that would have such a desultory impact on Cersei's life and all those she held dear. "Will the king and I have children?" she had asked the ugly old crone, defiantly resisting the tingles of fear that ran up and down her spine. The woman had snorted, "Oh, I. 6 and 10 for him, and 3 for you. Gold shall be their crowns and gold shall be their shrouds. And, when your tears have drowned you, the Valonqar shall wrap his hands about your pale white throat and choke the life from you." She had laughed and mocked Maggie the Frog all those years ago, but the bitch's words had cast a long shadow. Hadn't she not married Robert instead of Rhaegar? Hadn't her faithless husband fathered numerous bastards while she had had but 3 children? What's more, the children Cersei had given birth to had all had fine heads of golden hair. A Lannister family trait. And also the 3 golden crowns of the prophecy. And Melaea. Well, the less said about her the better. Cersei shuddered as evil thoughts filled her mind. Is what Maggie predicted coming true? I laughed when she spoke, but then why did I bother to find out that Valonqar means little brother in High Valyrian? Which is one of the many reasons I've hated Tyrion all these years. Still, dark thoughts persisted. Has my life been leading to this end with no way to prevent it? The notion was an awful one to contemplate. She was less afraid than she had been in the past with the idea of death. What now do I have to live for? I'm no longer queen, nor will likely to be. My sons and brother are dead. The only thing left to me is Myrcella. The thought brought steel to her soul. If it was her fate to die, then so be it, but she would resist it to the end. In the meantime she still lived, and so did her daughter. She couldn't let depression set in, she had work to do. My bright, beautiful golden girl, who even now sits in the company of my enemies. Held hostage at knife point. I must free her, but how? At one time she had hoped that Jaime and her father would come riding back into the city and scatter the Targaryens to the winds, but that hadn't happened. She had been unwilling to believe that they were dead, even when it was talked about so blithely at the trial, but now, after more than 2 months as a prisoner in the capital, it was clear that her father and brother were not going to ride to the rescue. She bit her lip. How then am I to free Myrcella? I have no army, no money and no friends to speak of. All of my allies are dead. She frowned. With the exception of Tyrion, but of what use is he? He brought the Golden Company to Westeros and left us vulnerable to their treachery in the first place. Cersei raged at her impotence. Her anger warring with the sorrow within her. Everyone has let me down. Father lost the war, Jaime got himself captured and then killed, Tyrion brought traitors into our midst. The list of mistakes and incompetence of my family is endless. The lock of the door was suddenly pulled back and the door swung open. Cersei stared into the open doorway. There, framed by the torchlight emanating from the corridor, was her tormentor. Septa Unella, her erstwhile captor and tormentor, stood with her hands folded across her chest. Her imperious expression radiating clearly even in the shadow of the dark cell. It is time. Cersei looked at the ground in front of her. I am not interested in coming. Even to your son's funeral. The gods will frown on such actions. The gods can go foo. Silence. The other woman hissed, stepping into the room and making to strike Cersei about the face. The former queen did not recoil, she merely turned her cheek so that it faced the old woman. What more can they do to me that has not already been done? Sensing her defiance, the Septa took a step back. The woman took a deep calming breath before addressing her captive once again. The High Septon has requested your presence in the Hall of Lamps. You will come with me. I will not. Circea enjoyed filling her voice with hatred, it was one of the few outlets for her frustration she had left. You will, Arnella replied venomously, or I shall have you carried up to the High Septon like a sack of grain. It was then that she saw the others. Behind the wrinkled woman was a group of men who each wore the simple robbers of the Sparrows. They were all skin-headed with the 7-pointed star engraved onto their forehead. Fanatics and fools, the lot of them. She had no choice, she realized. These ingrates would do exactly as their master commanded, whether I'm willing to go with them or not. With as much dignity as she could muster, Circea stood, smoothed her simple dress down and walked towards the doorway. There is much sin in you, child, Arnella remarked, sniffing as if she had detected a disagreeable odor, sin and evil. And there is nothing inside you but a wrinkled old husk that was too afraid of living to actually make something of yourself. Ignoring the doe woman, Circea stepped from her cell and walked the passageway. She shrugged off any attempt to steer or even assist her progress. After a few minutes of walking along a narrow passageway, the small group arrived at a new chamber where 2 other Septars stood looking expectantly at her. There was a large stone bath on the floor and a young girl was slowly pouring water into it. You will bathe, Arnella ordered. Her voice as ugly as her appearance. I will what? Circea demanded angrily. Do they think me a whore who will just disrobe on command? The old woman was not moved by her victim's objection as she indicated to the Sparrows that they should wait outside. You will remove your garments and let us bathe you in preparation for the funeral. It would be unseemly for you to be seen in such condition by the masses. What masses? The High Septon has opened up the funeral to the common people of the city, Arnella responded, impatiently as she clasped her hands in front of herself in her oft-repeated way. Since your son was the rightful king under all the laws of gods and men, we have decided to honor him by having a public funeral. You showed Joffrey no such consideration. Circea spat angrily, her eyes narrowing with rage. How dare they forget my eldest child? King Joffrey's body was kept from us, Arnella reasoned, her voice nothing but a monotone of boredom and judgment. She could just as easily have been reciting the ingredients for a meat pie rather than discussing the deaths of Circea's children. The Targaryen filth covered him in a cloak of the city watch and spirited his body out of King's Landing before his death was announced. Where is his body now? Circea asked urgently. What have they done to my son? The Septa looked impatiently at her. It is of no consequence, but I believe the northern barbarians allowed your son's body to be taken through their lines and sent to Casterly Rock. Circea closed her eyes. This, at least, was something. The Starks were ridiculously honorable, it was likely they had ensured that her son had made it safely home. She was glad that home in this case was not Storm's End. Joffrey would have no more business being buried there than I would. Now, Arnella said, with a swift clap of her hands, you will undress and wash your body. She eyed her disdainfully, would that your soul could be so easily cleansed. She made no move to carry out the Septa's instructions. I will not become naked in front of others. I am the queen. You were the queen, Arnella remarked with a cruel twist of her lips, now you are merely the queen mother, and even then that counts for very little these days. The older woman eyed the water. Now, remove your clothes or we shall do it for you. I cannot do it alone, Circea argued, unwilling to lose her dignity in front of these zealots. I need proper servants. She waved a hand at the waiting Septas. These peasants have no idea of how to dress a lady. His High Holiness expected you to say something like that, Arnella replied, sneering in distaste. We have had one of the Red Keep's servants brought here to assist you. At the side of the chamber a door opened and 2 Sparrows pushed a young girl into the room. The girl was short and pretty, with black hair and big dark eyes that darted around fervently as if she feared that someone would attack her at any moment. In this place, who could blame her? Still, something about the girl pulled at the edges of Circea's memory. Where have I seen you before, girl? The peasant gave a quick curtsy, a truly awful attempt at what should have been second nature to one serving a noble house in the capital. Forgive me, my lady, I was a servant of House Brax. Circea was not convinced. This one would have stood out like a dragon in a pack of sheep had she been one of the Red Keep's servants. Yet still, I would swear that I had seen this girl before. What is your name? Whom in particular did you serve? The girl looked perplexed. My name is Shay, my lady. I used to serve. Enough. Arnella cut in impatiently. It is of no matter who this girl served. What matters is that she is here to assist you now. But she is not properly trained. Circea shook her head. If she did serve in the Red Keep, I'd wager it was a recent occurrence. She doesn't look the part, she doesn't act. Does her appearance or actions have anything to do with whether she can help you wash? The Septa asked rhetorically. She needs no special skill to brandish a scrubbing brush. But I. No. The Septa's patience, short-lived at the best of times, was now thoroughly exhausted. I will hear no more. You will make do with what we have. She turned to the sparrows. You will wait outside until called for. As the men trooped away, Circea resigned herself to the inevitable. As she reached for the clasps of her dress, she looked at Arnella out of the corner of her eyes. I will see you die, old woman. Even though it may take the rest of my life, I will hear you die, and you will be screaming. They walked briskly up the stone stairs towards the Hall of Lamps. The group not stopping as they made their journey. Men were forced out of their path as they walked. It was a case of either stepping aside or being trampled underfoot. A fate that the members of the faith were unwilling to endure. No glory to the gods to be had in such a fate, I suppose. Ever present was Arnella, who seemed to take a cruel pleasure in hurrying her along. More than once Circea had stubbed a toe or tripped on some uneven flagstone, but she had been forced upright and pushed onwards. Any pain she suffered was met with supreme indifference by her escort. Shay had been left to trail in the wake of the group. She had not been dismissed by Arnella, but, in the absence of any other orders, the girl walked behind the group, adjusting her ill-fitting dress as she scrambled to keep up with their punishing pace. Circea had gleaned some information for the limited conversation she had been able to initiate with the young girl. Shay had worked in the Red Keep, but, after a quick series of questions, Circea had been able to determine that the girl was in fact a whore. What's more, she had served Circea's brother Tyrion and had arrived in King's Landing with him after he was made the acting hand of the king in their lord father's absence. She appeared to have been his bed warmer ever since. Where is Tyrion now? Circea had whispered as Shay had poured cold water over her head. He is still held prisoner, my lady, Shay had replied as she had bent to pick up another pail of water. The dragons have locked him in one of the black cells. I haven't seen him for weeks. Then how do you know he's still there? Circea demanded as the girl upended yet more icy water over her. One of the guards is nice to me, Shay had said, demurely looking at the ground. He brings me extra food and talks to me about things. I'm sure he does. Now, as they approached their destination, Circea turned her mind to other things. If Tyrion is still imprisoned, then he is as useful to me as he ever was, which is to say not at all. The thing now is to determine what the High Sparrow wants with me. Once I know that, I can try and get myself released and begin my quest for vengeance. The Hall of Lamps was busy. There were people everywhere, thronging the passageway, while ranks of sparrows made up two lines that created a narrow walkway in the center of the room leading through the door of the Great September all the way to the September proper. Circea cast her eyes to the entranceway to see the suspended globes of colored glass reflecting the sun's rays onto the crowd below. Arnella led her into the hall. Reluctantly Circea followed. These people shouldn't be here. This should be a private matter between myself and my son. The faith have no right to interfere in such matters. Much less use it for their own purposes. In the end of the hall, by the entranceway to the main hall of the September, stood the High Sparrow. As always, the man was wearing nothing but rags. His dirty, rough-word feet poked out of the bottom of his threadbare robes. He looks like a lowly beggar in the streets rather than as the religious leader of the entire Seven Kingdoms. The man regarded her as she approached him. He took in her new clothes and brushed hair. He did not seem particularly impressed. The old man nodded. I'm glad you could join us, Your Grace. As if I had a choice but to be here. Where is my son? The High Septon's lips pursed as he indicated the far end of the hall. The king will be arriving shortly on a bier carried by members of the faith. He will be taken through the hall and into the September beyond it. We will then begin the service, after which he will be buried along with his predecessors in the vaults below the holy shrine. Circe wanted to scream. Tommen's body should be returned to me. She fought to control her mounting anger as she swept an arm around the hall. This is a private matter. He is my son. Forgive me, your grace, but King Tommen was the ruler of the 7 kingdoms. The man's face was emotionless, without a hint of sorrow. As such, his death is a matter of state. Those in the Red Keep have seen fit to provide his body to us for burial, and we shall ensure that the appropriate rites are carried out, as befits the king. Some king. Circe scoffed. He was never crowned, nor did he ever sit a throne. 7 hells, his reign was a matter of weeks if not days. There is more to being king than being awarded mere objects, the High Septon claimed, looking calmly towards the end of the hall. Likewise, the length of his reign is also irrelevant. The faith acknowledged your son as king. As such he deserves the honor of a burial here in the Great September. The man turned his head to regard her with a detached expression. I'm sure you understand. Oh, I understand, you pathetic old man. You wish to make a declaration against the Targaryens, and you're using the death of my little boy to do it. Cold hatred flowed through her veins. She wanted to cry out, to rage against her captives who aimed to use the foul murder of her last son as a political tool, but she knew it would be of no use to her. If she created a commotion, then the High Septon would simply have her escorted from the halls, leaving Tommen alone, with the same people that did not lift a finger to help him when his life was clearly in jeopardy. A cacophony of wooden staffs striking wood silenced the crowd who, up until now, had been talking amongst themselves while they waited for the funeral to start. At the other end of the hall a new group had arrived. Immediately Circe could see that this group were different to those that currently occupied the hall. These people were dressed in red leather armor that had distinctive patterns and motifs emblazoned upon them. These were not knights as such, but infantry soldiers who fought in the deserts rather than the colder climates of the northern regions. Dornish. Circe caught her breath as the party moved around a single willowy figure who was in the middle of the group. As they crossed the threshold, the figure's hands came up and she pulled down the hood that topped the golden cloak that flowed around the person from head to toe. One's glance told Circe all she needed to know. She had not seen her for years, though it felt like lifetimes, but even with that she could have identified this person anywhere. Myrcella. A call rang out from a septon by the main entranceway. All hail her grace, Queen Myrcella of House Baratheon, first of her name, Queen of the Andals and the First Men, Mistress of the 7 Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. The people in the hall did not know how to respond. Some bowed in respect, but most merely looked confused, on edge. Circe eyed the High Septon furiously. Is he trying to get her killed? Declaring her queen will do nothing but draw our enemies to her. Myrcella looked uncomfortable as she was led down the long hallway towards where Circe and the High Septon were standing. As they neared her, Circe could see that her little girl had grown since last she had seen her on the docks of King's Landing. She walked with careful steps, though her eyes were set ahead as she spied her mother. Circe's heart yearned to run forward and embrace her last surviving child in her arms, but she knew this was not the place. Not in front of this rabble. She contented herself with offering her daughter a hopeful smile. Welcome, your grace, the High Septon announced, his voice carrying in the vast stone and marble hall. We welcome you into the loving arms of the faith. Myrcella looked sideways at a tall warrior. The man was well-muscled but lean. Circe recognized the man as being the one who had volunteered to fight Gregor Clegane. Prince Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, gave Circe's daughter a slight smile and a nod. I am here to pay my respects to my brother, Myrcella said, her soft voice low and slightly trembling, who I loved dearly. Of course, your grace, the High Septon said, his smile becoming somber and understanding. Today is a sad day for both the realm and your family in particular. What's left of our family will have its revenge, you sunken cunt. When Myrcella did not move to speak, the High Septon merely stood back and gestured that the girl should make her way into the September proper. With an uncertain look, first at Prince Oberyn, then at her mother, Myrcella walked towards the large doors. Silently, Circe made to follow her. The service had concluded, the small folk and the few nobles were filing through the September's doors and back towards daylight. The effect of having so many people crammed into such a space had caused the heat of the room to rise significantly. The room had become stifling at the end, and Circea had been glad when the service was over and the large double doors were flung open to allow the people to leave. She looked down on the bier from her place on the central dais. There, covered by a golden shroud, was her youngest child. Circea hadn't had the courage yet to remove the cloth covering her son's body so that she may look on his face one last time. She had heard from Unella that there was nothing much left of her son, and she walked with herself over whether it was better to take in his countenance as it was now or leave herself with the memory she still had. Mother. Circea turned to take in the sight of her daughter standing in front of her. No longer caring about appearances, she reached up and embraced her child, hugging into her. She had not cried as the Septons had prattled on about the gods and the fickle nature of existence, but she wept now as she grasped her daughter to her. After a moment's hesitation, the girl returned her mother's hug, her arms coming around the older woman and holding her tightly. She was not certain how long they stood there, their tears of grief spilling from their eyes to cascade down their cheeks. It could have been hours, or maybe just moments, she had no way of knowing. Her whole world had become this girl who was wrapped in her arms. It was perfect, it was as if they existed in a spell of tranquility and peace. If she could, Circea would have spent the rest of her life in this moment and been content. Sadly, contentment was to be denied. A voice broke the spell, "Your Grace." Circea pulled back. The High Septon was standing just a few paces away looking wryly at them both, though his attention was more on Myrcella than on her mother. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace," the man said, still looking intently at Myrcella, "but I would have words with you before your escorts attempt to spirit you away." The former queen looked around her. At the sides of the room, in the shadows of the 7 broad aisles, she spied people loitering. Some were doubtless members of the Sparrows, but Circea knew that Myrcella's escort was within easy reach. One word of trouble and she suspected the Red Viper would be by their side in moments. "What can I do for you, Your Holiness?" Myrcella's voice was composed even though fresh tears still glistened on her young cheeks. The holy man gave a perfunctory bow and smiled sadly. "I wanted to express my sincere condolences for your loss. For all that might be said of your older brother Joffrey, Tommen was an innocent. Too young to have sinned in the eyes of the 7. She wanted to throttle the man. How dare he criticize Joff? What does this old man know about the pressures of ruling a kingdom, especially one consumed with traitors and rebels?" "Thank you, Your Holiness," Myrcella said, not forgetting her courtesies. "What does your Grace intend to do now?" The High Septon's voice was still conversational, though there was an edge to it. "Do? What is there to do?" Circea spat as confusion reigned within her. "We have only just buried her brother." Of course the man's voice was clipped, however, "the duty given to her Grace upon her brother's untimely death is now yours to carry." Circea could not believe her ears. Here we are at Tommen's funeral and all this man can whittle on about it duty. It defies belief. "I'm afraid I do not understand," Myrcella said slowly. "Of which duty do you speak?" The High Septon looked surprised at the question. "Why, of ruling the 7 kingdoms, of course." Her daughter let out a muted cry, as though that was the last thing on her mind. Circea pulled her away from the High Septon while fixing the old man with a stony glance. "This is not the time or the place to discuss such things." "On the contrary," the man replied, "this is the perfect time. Once this is over, I fear that the Queen will be escorted back to the Dornish camp and kept under armed guard for the foreseeable future. There may never be another opportunity to discuss this matter." Circea glanced round. The Dornish guard seemed restless. The olive-skinned figures had started to circle the dais like a hunter stalking a prey. "Who are you to discuss these things?" she snarled angrily. "This is a matter for high lords, not for jumped-up peasants who bully themselves into the position of High Septon." The man glared at her. "I am the religious leader of all Westeros. I have the right to ensure that the gods' will is heard." She scoffed. "The will of the gods? Nonsense. If the gods do speak to men, why would they use a battered old fool like you as their vessel of communication?" "Your heresy speaks volumes, child," the High Septon said, resuming an emotionless face, "and believe me, you will answer for it someday. Spare me your threats." Circea spat at him. "I am not some mewling peasant who is frightened by you invoking the 7-pointed star. Your bluster is as meaningless as your anger," her opponent replied. "I am not your enemy." "No." Circea seethed. I hardly see how incorporating my daughter into your little rebellion against that Targaryens is the sign of a friend. I mean to sit your daughter upon her rightful throne, the High Septon said evenly. Please, Myrcilla's true father's rightful throne was a cavalry horse. He never had a throne to speak of. I have no throne, Myrcilla said quietly, looking at the floor. I have agreed to support King Aegon and Queen Daenerys in exchange for marrying Prince Tristan. Cersei turned on her daughter, a look of amazed anguish crossing her face. You agreed what? I agreed to forego any rights I have in order to marry Tristan. How dare you do that? Cersei raged, the need for quiet forgotten. Myrcilla met her eyes, resolve hardening her features. It was my decision, mother. Not when it affects us all. Cersei stormed at her. Her daughter was unbowed. I love him, mother. I want to marry him, and I will be able to after the Targaryens' Dark Alliance is signed. You will not. Cersei said curtly, her anger bubbling over.